Morning. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I asked Jeff if I could just have a few minutes. I've kind of been working really hard on making this all happen. It's important to me. I am the alderman of the first ward, and the majority of what you're gonna see in here, the CNI, is in my ward. So it's really important to me that this redevelopment commission do what it's charged to do and really have an impact on the future of these wonderful neighborhoods. They deserve it. It's time. We've been throwing stones at it for the last 40 years, as long as I've been here, and it's time. I will tell you, it's going to take courage and very difficult decisions, but I have no doubt that each and every one of you brings something really special to the table that you'll be able to do this. I will ask you to remember that this is not just about housing. You're not here to be a housing agency. You're here to be a redevelopment agency, which means infrastructure and education and transportation, and all of those pieces have to fit together to make this work. Most importantly to me right now is infrastructure, and I feel very strongly, and you all may decide differently, but I feel strongly if we don't address the infrastructure of these neighborhoods first, building houses is just not going to answer the question. We've got to make sure the water, the sewer, sidewalks, different things like that are okay. Do we need to bring in dirt? I don't know, but do we need to do all these things to build these neighborhoods to where they need to be? So, have an open mind, look at it in a broad view, and ask questions. Please do not hesitate. You can beat Jeff up now because he'll be your director, not me, but ask questions. That's what he's here for.
It was like 12 months though.
That's right, yeah. His staff is here to really, assist you and do things. You got the queen of CDBG over there, Landa, and she knows it inside and out, and that's going to be a great resource for you. If you don't know what CDBG, it's Community Development Block Grant money, and that'll be an important part of what we do. But the aldermen, we're here as ex officio, so we're here just to lend our time and whatever resources we can, but you will have your own resources, you will have your own decision making. You're like a mini board of aldermen in this neighborhood, and that's what you have to perceive yourself to be. But you will be impacting generations to come. I'm so excited about the possibilities of what you're going to be able to do. I will ask you that to please be engaged. There's some members that are not here today. I certainly understand everybody's busy schedule, believe me. But if you feel that you can't give it what you need, please let us know. I promised the mayor in pulling this together that each person would be engaged and participatory. If they're not, then we'll replace you. And no disrespect to anybody, but we want to make sure we have engaged representatives on here because it's that important. This is so important to the future of our city that I need for everybody to be engaged. Okay. Mr. Wallace, so glad to see you.
Should have went that way, but
That's okay. Does anybody have, you're going to hear from the experts. I'm so glad you got the two best people here, Marcia and Tyler, and they're going to really give you an idea about what this is all about and how to go about it. But does anybody have a question for me as far as the Board of Aldermen goes and your official appointment? No? Probably everybody good? Okay, I'm going to shut up for the rest of it and turn it over to the real people. Yeah, it sounded good. It sounded good. Don't you laugh. Look, just so you know, a little history. All of this is Kip Paragoy's fault because he came to see me in 1994 and asked me to sit on the TVA board to get me involved. So this is your fault.
I apologize, everybody.
All right. Okay. Well, if I may just start quickly, because Sabrina mentioned this, I'll say it. A commission or redevelopment commission is defined in the statutes as a public body and a body corporate and politic created and organized for the purpose of redevelopment. So when she says that you are a mini board of aldermen, she means it. There's a great deal of responsibility that comes with this. So I'm excited that you're all here. We look forward to sharing with you about redevelopment commissions. I'm Tyler Mulligan. I'm a faculty member at the UNC School of Government, and I'm the director of a program we call the Redevelopment Finance Initiative, which helps local governments with real estate development and other development issues that they face, especially in distressed areas. And with me is Marcia Parrott, who is the associate director of the Development Finance Initiative. We will call it DFI. So you'll hear us say DFI. That's what we mean is this program that's designed from the school government to reach out to local governments and be there to help them with these complicated development issues. I would just say, if you're not familiar with the School of Government, I just very quickly want you to know we've been around since the Great Depression. And the purpose of the school from the founder, Albert Coates, was to tell faculty, don't just sit in your offices in the ivory tower and think great thoughts or write books and teach. Get out there. And his quote was, get in the bloodstream of local governments, understand what they need and how to help them. And so that is exactly what DFI does, is be out here and help you with the problems that are facing you, with the challenges that are facing you, and the opportunities that are presented to you right from the very beginning. We are an unusual academic institution at the University of North Carolina. We answer your calls. So we actually will respond, so please do not just be even beyond this 3-hour session that we're going to do. We are a resource here for you, and we want that. We enjoy that interaction. It's why we choose to work here instead of somewhere else. So I'll start with all that. This morning's agenda, just very briefly, Marcia has actually helped create and run a redevelopment area in Kinston. And so you're going to hear from her about what it means to be a redevelopment commission, what you're trying to accomplish and how to accomplish it. And you're going to hear from her examples in Kinston and some perhaps from other areas in North Carolina, but drawing heavily on your North Carolina experience. That I think you'll find interesting and uplifting and exciting. And then you'll take a break and you'll come back and I will pummel you with the law for an hour and a half or so and make you wish you didn't exist. But Marcia starts, it'll be happy and good, and then I will end with the legal aspects which we'll have fun. We'll have fun. I could try my best to make the law fun. But you need to understand your statutory responsibilities and the limits that you have, and interestingly, the limits of the city. Because the city is your partner in this. I mean, that's these ex officio members, they are your partners. And sometimes it's going to make sense for them to do something rather than you to do something. We'll talk about that. And we'll get pretty deep into this, but I hope you enjoy it. And please ask questions at any time. And I think that's enough. Any questions before we get started?
All right.
Okay. Go for it, Marcia.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Marcia Parrott with DFI. Tyler, don't be scared about his section on legal stuff. I'm actually going to sit and listen to it again, although I've heard it many times because I could always use a good brain melting. So it's actually really interesting. But we're going to start with a general overview about urban redevelopment areas. What are the steps to establishing an urban redevelopment area? What kind of tools become available to you as a redevelopment and commission and city? We'll go through some case studies. We'll talk about your role as a redevelopment commission and how you're going to interact with other governing bodies in this process, like the planning board and the board of aldermen. We're going to talk about a redevelopment plan, which is really your first charge as a redevelopment commission, right, is making sure you have all those elements for a redevelopment plan. I do understand that there's the Choice Neighborhoods Transformation Plan, so y'all have got an excellent head start in terms of having those elements, but how are you going to put those together, repackage, perhaps update some of those to make sure that you're meeting all those requirements? That's your first job, so we'll talk a lot about that. And then some next steps, some questions that you might want to think through. I really prefer that y'all ask questions throughout. I think if there's something that stumps, I'm going to try and read your faces and see if you're looking at me like, what? And pause and give you an opportunity, but do interrupt throughout. I want this to be a dialogue rather than me talking at you the next hour or so. He talked about this, the School of Government, so I get to skip it. An organization, DFI. But first, let's start off with defining an urban redevelopment area. Tyler read to you the definition of a redevelopment commission. And this is the statute. Again, if you want some good reading to put you to sleep, it's actually pretty interesting. I would suggest, you're actually probably going to have this memorized by the end of this process, this chapter and article, but this is everything you need to know about redevelopment commission and redevelopment areas is here in this statute. So if you Google it, it will pop up. But essentially, an urban redevelopment area, or URA, is a geographic area targeted for redevelopment by a local government. Once it is designated by the local government, there are special statutory powers that then come in place to attract private investment. But first, you have to create a redevelopment plan for that redevelopment area. And any of those special powers that you use have to align with the objectives that are set forth in that plan. So you get special superpowers by being a URA and a redevelopment commission, but you have to make sure that they're faithful to the plan. So what does it do? Well, this is not an official thing that you'll see in statute, but I think it's a really important outcome that's, I think, already happened with the transformation plan, and the reason that I think the city moved at such lightning speed, too, to put together this redevelopment commission. I'm always impressed, but I shouldn't be surprised with Sabrina at the helm that if there's something that you set your mind to do, that it happens pretty quickly. So y'all have really moved at an impressive speed in terms of implementing, moving forward with this plan. But what a URA is great for is building community consensus around a vision and goals, right? Making sure everybody's on the same page at the table and moving forward in the same direction. As we mentioned, it opens up some tools that otherwise you wouldn't have available, and I'll talk a little bit about those, and then Tyler's going to go deep into what those tools are. It also sends a really important signal to the private market. In distressed areas where there hasn't been a lot of private investment, where there's been disinvestment or abandonment or neglect, it's pretty risky for a private developer or the private sector to take the gamble on investing in an area like that, right? So just the act of forming that redevelopment commission, of establishing a URA, of having that plan, is letting the private market know we're serious about co-partnering with you in redeveloping this area. So that's really important for the private sector. It does not guarantee state or federal funding. So there's no magic wand by virtue of having a redevelopment area that you open up magic treasure boxes of funding. I will say that the act of having the plan in place and having the formality and the vision certainly can go a long way if you're applying for a competitive grant to show that you put the forethought in. But it isn't a magic wand that will open up any special funding. I'll pause there. Questions? Keep going. All right, so what are the steps to creating an urban redevelopment area? 1, form the commission. So y'all have done that. It's great. 2, define the URA boundaries, and we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. Then the planning board will qualify the URA, which is statutory language, but essentially the redevelopment commission will decide what the boundaries of the urban redevelopment area are, and then you'll take those to the planning board and say, planning board, what do you think? Does this meet the definition? It's really a checks and balances. You'll see that with the different bodies that are involved in the URA, the planning board, you all, and the board of aldermen, they're really trying to set up a system so that everyone's making sure they're following the rules and that there's a process for making sure that.
Have the boundaries been established already?
You will do
A
that
little bit,
a
but-
little bit today with the choice
They're
neighborhood.
flexible.
Yeah. Right, yeah, we'll create a new boundary. We've heard Pembroke, there's other areas that are outside of the boundaries that we've used for the Renaissance Gateway plan and for this CNI plan that we may want to expand the boundaries, shrink it. It's up to the commission to do so.
Yep. I've included a map at the end of this with the boundaries that are in the CNI plan. And something we might want to talk about too is if there are different areas that have very distinct goals, sometimes it's worth perhaps creating separate URAs or phasing it. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it that we can talk more about.
I have a question, and it may be extremely elementary. Who's the planning board?
Great question.
Planning zoning board.
Planning and zoning board.
Okay.
Goes by different names in different places.
Yeah.
Actually, in the statute, you're going to see it referred to as the planning commission. The planning board is the commonly known. You'll see this is one of the few instances, there's really 2 instances when this commission will interact with the planning board in a formal way. And the first one will be to review the boundaries. Once the planning board determines that yes, we agree with the redevelopment commission's boundaries, they'll pass a resolution confirming those findings and the boundaries. There's some steps, a public hearing that's required, as well as a resolution that has to be filed with the Secretary of State of North Carolina. Have y'all ever gone to the Secretary of State website and done a corporation search? Mm-hmm. Yep. So it actually is filed much like a corporation. So if you're curious to see where other redevelopment commissions exist in North Carolina, you can actually search on the Secretary of State website and you'll find that.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
question first.
Please.
So in number 3, are you saying that the planning board has the ability to veto if we define certain boundaries and they disagree?
I mean, actually, the planning commission sets those boundaries. They have to declare the area blighted or in danger of becoming blighted. So they're the ones setting the boundaries. It actually starts, you all ask the planning commission to certify an area, and then they review it and they certify the area. If that helps you at all.
Okay.
Although I will say in Kinston, the planning board was not necessarily up to that task, so we had to do a lot of that for them, and they reviewed. So it kind of depends on who's the data cruncher, or who's the
leader?
Who's the leader?
And you all will be looked to as
Right. So maybe your planning board, yes, will say, we'll do all that, but it's, I think, more likely with this board that you'll be the one who presents that and they'll review it.
I'll go over those statutory steps, technically, who's supposed to do what, and in order to make sure you do it.
Jamie's our attorney if you can.
Perfect.
So-
Yes.
Everybody else.
Talk about these in a little more detail.
And I don't know, Kip, have you served on the planning and zoning? Yes, you've been on that.
19 times.
That's right. I can't, you know, I'm so confused with that and board of adjustment, and have you served on P and Z? You've served on P and Z, so we just have one, okay, so, it's.
And then behind you, there was a question.
Oh, I'm sure we'll get to it, but you said there was more procedural things, so
Okay.
I'll save it. I'm writing it down.
All right, so there's more steps. Once the boundaries have been filed with the Secretary of State, you've held the appropriate public hearings, then you do the redevelopment plan, which in a lot of places can be the bulk of the work. It sounds like here you have a pretty great start with the C&I plan. So a lot of it will be more repackaging what elements are already in C&I and figuring out how to make those fit the redevelopment construction. So that process varies. Then that plan goes through another series of approval before the public, before the planning board, back to the public, and then back to the Board of Aldermen. And Tyler will cover those procedural items in detail, right? A little bit?
Not detail,
Well,
it's really boring.
yeah, it is pretty boring, but essentially that's the flow. And then you can begin implementation. I'll say that typically in other communities, the process of creating a redevelopment plan can be very time consuming. I mean, it probably took y'all, 2 years at least
18
for the
months,
transformation plan, so.
It's 2 years actually.
Is that right, 2 years, right? Yeah. So it can be very time consuming depending on the size of the area and whatnot, but it sounds like you all have a head start with the C&I plan, so I assume it will be much more expedited in this case.
Do you want my time frame?
What is it? How do we get
I'd
this?
like for all of
to number
this
7?
stuff to be done by the first of the year, so by January, we could jump in and go to work, because we got a lot of work. I know, but, I understand that boards meet once a month, but I just don't want to kick the can down the road. We have kicked the can down the road for 40 years. So if we don't have goals and deadlines, I feel like we're going to linger. So the quicker we can get the work, the better it would be, because I know you already. To me, this is the stuff you have to do. The work you're going to do is the stuff that we need to do, or that we want to do and make in a better community. It's just my 2 cents, but that would be the time frame I'd like to look at.
Okay, and I'm not saying that's not going to be feasible, but looking to the experts and then to Jeff, is that timeline something that we could possibly pull off with the number of public meetings that seem to be required in between, with this board having to review things and that board having to review things?
Probably not.
It will be challenging. However, there's
No, I'm not
the board of aldermen will let you off the hook because there's also a financing plan that's required, so they're going to probably have to figure out what they're willing to pay for as part of the plan.
Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is I need for y'all to work.
Well, we'll give you a timeline.
Okay.
All All right, so here are some of those typical planning activities, and again, these might be some that you've already done with choice neighborhoods. Look at your past planning efforts, which it sounds like that's really going to be the basis of creating this redevelopment plan, is looking through that C&I plan and seeing what parts can transfer and what parts perhaps need to be updated or amended to meet those requirements. Data collection is really important, and that's the step that goes into qualifying the URA, the boundaries, and that it meets the definition of the state statute for being a redevelopment area in the first place, which Tyler will talk more about that definition. But essentially, it's a lot of analysis of individual parcels within the area. Things that I assume have been done, maybe need to be updated from the C&I plan, but creating maps, looking at vacancy, looking at distress, looking at abandonment, other issues to ensure that it does meet those definitions of being blighted or being in danger of being blighted. And Tyler will talk more about what those requirements are for those definitions, but a lot of data
We had
collection.
an intern just do that a few months ago.
Oh, great,
Every property and everything.
awesome. Yeah, and I know you all have good data from your GIS department.
What about demographics?
It's not necessarily a requirement in terms of,
It might not be that, but I think that's
yeah,
an
an
important part
important thing
of
to know, yeah.
understanding the neighborhoods
Mhm.
and what the potential is for those neighborhoods.
Yeah. I think I'd say that it tends to focus on the physical condition of the area, although certainly demographics, poverty rate, unemployment, household income could factor into that. I'm not sure that the statute really
The statute only
considers
cares about,
demographics.
yeah, I mean, it can be, poverty, to some extent, we'll talk
Right,
more about the
okay.
definition. But, I mean, it's things like, is the area conducive to ill health, transmission of disease, infant mortality, juvenile delinquency and crime, detrimental to public health, safety, morals, and welfare because of dilapidation, deterioration, age, obsolescence, and etc. High density of population, overcrowding, unsanitary, unsafe conditions. Those are the things that you really look at.
So focusing more on the physical conditions and how those can impact community health and well-being in terms of qualifying the URA per statute. But that's not to say that demographic information isn't going to be important in telling the story of why you're making this a redevelopment area and why it's important to intervene there. Because you'll see some of the tools you're going to get, I mean, you're going to get some interesting powers by establishing a redevelopment area. And have to make some tough decisions on redevelopment. So having the basis or the foundation of why this area is in need of intervention, I think only can enhance the story and help to get consensus around action. But it isn't necessary for the requirements of the statute.
Going back to what Jeff said, you said that you all have had an intern to go residence by residence, lot by lot, and you all had an assessment made
Correct. Of every structure.
of every
Right.
structure.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you all also do an assessment of how many residences are inhabited that have not had power prior to the storm?
That's, yeah.
There are quite a few residents that live without electricity prior to the storm. This has nothing to do with Florence.
Correct.
But they were already living in all kinds of situations. I live in the Duffield area. I travel down those streets every single day, and I see the danger. I see the delinquency. I see all kinds of things that I hope that your intern will definitely document.
We can go over, it was just a structural survey for her. But, hey, let's do it.
Absolutely.
Kind of building off Mr. Morgan's comments as well as Marcia's. You mentioned an area being blighted and that being, I guess, part of why we can target that area. With Mr. Morgan's comments, say a third of an area is, as he just described, a third is okay and a third is a little bit better. Does that in any way shape the fact that we can target that area or have to stay away from that area? Is what constitutes blight on a neighborhood?
Yeah, do you mind if we hold it? Keep those are great questions. You ought to, throughout this, be thinking, do we draw our line around that particular neighborhood? Do we include this other? These are exactly the questions you need to be thinking about, and we'll get more into those statutory definitions and give you a chance to chew on them a little bit later, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
And they'll be helpful in thinking about strategy for your implementation, right? Do you go to the area that is the worst off, because that's what's most needed of intervention? Do you start on the fringes that can perhaps have an impact? It's all part of the strategy too, as you're thinking about implementation.
Understanding that there's a statutory definition for blight, does this commission have the power to order or command additional data collection if we see gaps in previous collection?
I mean, I think you want to be confident in the data that you're presenting to the planning board for them to qualify the URA. I don't know about commanding. I mean, I'm taking
Just
commanding
ask.
the wrong
You have a
word.
budget.
Yeah,
If
would
you
have
want
the
it, just
ability-
ask me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a budget,
Yep.
I suppose, and that's gonna.
We have an top-notch GIS, I say department, but it's just Alice.
Yeah. Incredible.
And she's incredible. We have data,
Right.
everything available we have. If we see gaps, we go and get it. We'll either do it ourselves or we'll find another clearinghouse that has it.
And you have you run your own utilities here, right?
Correct.
Department of Electric. And that can be really helpful in the kind of data that you're talking about in terms of
Yeah.
where are locations that are occupied but have inactive utility accounts. You could transpose that with U.S. Postal Service data and its utility account data. So there's lots of neat ways that you can, I'm happy to talk with you. I love
Yeah, the
doing
fire,
that type of
fire
data collection.
department ought to have an inventory of all these structures as well. They have a different analysis, but they also maintain that.
Yeah.
So we did, I'm sorry, I'm sidetracking a little bit, but it's really neat. Because we took that utility data and we looked throughout Duffyfield to try to find kind of a per square foot cost of utilities for homes and try to link, for a
Track energy
600
efficiency.
energy efficiency, a 600 square foot house has a bill of $400 a month. But, three blocks down, a 1,200 square foot house has a utility bill of $200 a month. So we're using that to target areas where we can go in with our CDBG funds and do some weatherization or do some other kind of upfitting to try to reduce those bills. So we have all that data.
You will also have numbers of those that are rental properties versus those that are actually ownership homes.
Yeah, that's easy to find. I mean, we don't have a list of that's rented, that's rented, that's rented, but that's easy to.
Because we can find that most of those that are rental properties are not up to code.
Sure.
There are all kinds of violations.
Absolutely.
And most of the people that, well, I'm not gonna say most, but quite a few of those that own homes do not live in the Duffyfield area.
Sure.
And those that do own homes, they live in their homes.
You should be able to do all that analysis, and that data is available to you. Happy to talk to you about how we did that in
And
other places.
let me answer this question very directly, Jamie's question and your question is, you have the actual power as a redevelopment commission to issue subpoenas and have people come and testify before you under oath, interestingly. So if there's data that you need, you actually have the ability.
Okay. Does this commission also have the right to vacant lots that have all kinds of debris, brush, and are a danger with their dilapidation, but not as it relates to buildings, not just the dilapidated buildings, but actually lots that have just brush that has grown up over and out of control?
We have that now.
Yeah.
Don't need the commission. Yeah, code enforcement. The only issue we have with that is we've taken a position, and I don't know how long ago it was, but it was well before I got here, that if it wasn't ever really cut, if it wasn't clear cut or if it had really mature growth on it, we haven't required people to clear that.
It has not been enforced. We're going to take care of that.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk more when it comes to your powers, and one of your powers that you have, you already have a lot as a city with your code enforcement, but something with the URA is you get coverage to do more targeted or proactive code enforcement. So let's talk more about that, but certainly that is something as part of the redevelopment area. And in my experience in Kinston, is they use the URA to have that political and legal coverage to really go after certain unhealthy property owners, I guess is the best way to say it. Yep, yep, yep. And there's certainly ways to understand renter versus owner occupied. It's actually pretty simple in terms of matching the mailing address of the tax records with the actual property address. You can filter that and create maps that tell you renter versus ownership pretty quickly. And you can also dig deep into where those owners are coming from. I mean, data is an incredible thing, right? You can overlay where are the distressed properties or the properties with the most code enforcement violations, and who are the top owners that are guilty of that. So you can put it all together. Yeah, he's probably already got it. Yeah. I'll say in Kinston, when they embarked on starting the redevelopment area, there was a very similar sentiment that a lot of the property owners in this particular neighborhood, which if y'all are familiar with Kinston, is Mitchelltown, just next to downtown Kinston. It's to the west of downtown, in between the river, an old mill neighborhood. That these were out-of-town property owners who were letting their properties fall in. And actually, when we did the analysis, we found that most of the property owners that were the major violators were local. It was really interesting to have that data. Not saying that that it could be the case here, but in Kinston it turned out that actually the major violators were local property owners, and that was helpful in getting some political coverage for code enforcement to be able to do their job more effectively and to really have the data that nobody can argue with.
So for us to gain access to these different types of data, Jeff is our go-to person.
Correct.
Yep, sounds like it. It sounds like they've been preparing for this moment and putting the maps together to
Whole life.
Yes.
Yep, your whole life, and to make, and that's going to be really, your boundaries are going to be very precise for the redevelopment area that it's going to be, you're not drawing a circle, you're actually going to outline which parcels, contiguous parcels, are part of this. So you are going to need that level of precision and data to be able to make those decisions. So it's not a circle that you're drawing for the boundaries, you're really fine-tuning which house is included. And I know that Alice is an expert in this. So you're going to create a lot of maps that are going to help you define those boundaries, but also to set goals, right? Perhaps you'll do a community needs assessment or survey. Sounds like that's something that's been done already with CNI. Talk with property owners and residents. You might, and I would suggest this, even though I know there was a lot of community engagement with CNI. A couple of years have passed, and I think it's good to keep people updated, probably having some sort of community meeting to help the residents understand what's going on. Doing market analyses, again, I think these were done with CNI, a residential and commercial market analyses. Perhaps some sort of design charrette to create conceptual renderings. Again, I flipped through this last night, your transformation plan, you've got those, but check in, make sure those are still appropriate. A financial feasibility analysis, so you'll see that the redevelopment plan requires that you have a financial plan for development. So you're going to want to make sure, especially since it's been a couple of years with CNI, you're probably going to want to update that with new construction costs and what the public-private partnership might look like in terms of what the public investment will be.
I've got a question, Marcia.
Yeah.
On the financial feasibility analysis, right now, everything concerning construction is totally out of whack because of the hurricane. So when you do that, do we look at prices and things prior to Florence, or do we, because in the next year, I think they're going to be totally out of whack. People are, because we have so few construction people and the need is so great. So I'm just curious how that might fit into this, because it's an unusual circumstance.
I'd probably use real-time numbers,
You
even
would?
though
Okay.
they're out of whack. Just knowing.
It should benefit yourself to use lower numbers if you're doing.
No,
it around the
understood.
inflation.
But I don't want to scare anybody
Right.
off either.
I think to have them
This
as-
is a long-term plan, and it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, we're talking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. It's got to be that sustainable down there. And
I would definitely suggest that you update and take second looks at this financial plan as you move forward. But I think to be as conservative as possible, I would use current construction estimates. And right now, we're in a period where construction is booming, and
Yeah.
we're seeing construction costs going up 5–15% every year regardless, even in markets that aren't impacted by natural disasters. So I think, yeah, it's probably better to overestimate than to under.
Are we going into the financial feasibility analysis in more detail, Tyler?
We don't have enough information about what you'll, we can do
Well,
that in the
what-
future.
okay, my
but-
question is, what's feasibility mean?
Yeah, so essentially, taking the perspective of a private developer and determining what kind of financial investment will this take to achieve our goals. Let's say your goal is to build 30 houses for home ownership. Maybe that's a goal. Or to rehab 30 houses for a home ownership program. What's going to be the cost of construction to do that rehab? What are the returns that are going to be required by a private developer for that to be sustainable? What's the ability to pay in terms of rent or mortgage that will be needed to make this project work? And is there a gap that needs to be filled by someone, the public sector or someone else?
And
So-
let's say you promise as part of the plan that you are now putting before the public that you're going to do streetscape improvements. You're going to bury the power lines and you're going to put in some nice sidewalks. And at the same time, you're going to build a community center right there on the corner, and who knows? Before you make those promises, there needs to be a financial plan in place. If the community center is not going to be built for 3 years, then maybe we don't need to use hurricane-related construction numbers. But you'll still need to show that there's a plan by the alderman to fund that community center and that there's a commitment there.
So ultimately a business plan.
Yes.
And the business plan has both public and private feasibility analysis. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, are we looking at public
We're assuming public
feasibility or we're going with private?
Well, it depends. That's
Okay.
that's up to you, right?
Right.
So it could be that you say, well, we want to put, public housing in this particular location, but we're hoping to attract a private developer to build a low-income housing tax credit project, for example. And that's all private dollars. But maybe you're suggesting that you'll, provide street improvements around that corner. Maybe you'll extend utilities there, upgrade the utilities. Well, the public portion of that, you'll need to be prepared to pay for.
I think if you get to know Tyler and I, you'll know that we want to put as much of this on the private sector as possible and try to incentivize and facilitate them to do that work. But I think in areas like this, there is also public leadership necessary to put confidence in the private sector. And a public-private partnership can be improving the infrastructure and the streets while the developers work on the physical structures. So there's different ways that you can slice and dice it, but in our experience with a neighborhood that's distressed in particular, there is going to be some sort of public leadership required to co-invest in some way, maybe not directly in the projects, but maybe in the infrastructure with the private sector. Even for example, right now at DFI, we're working on a mixed-use, market-rate and affordable housing project in downtown Durham. Y'all know downtown Durham is changing a lot. And what we're assuming with this project is that they're going to rely on some low-income housing tax credits, 4% tax credits. But we are assuming that the public will have to participate, even in a place like downtown Durham that is growing quickly, that there is going to be some public participation in the form of a loan and conveying the land at below market rate. So
I think that, on behalf of the city, we realize that we're ready to be a partner in this. We realize that we've got to have some skin in the game to, create that public trust too, that, we're all in this together. So as we maybe do infrastructure needs or use CDBG funds or work with Habitat or whatever it's going to take, we can do that to create more incentive for the private sector to come in and develop. And that's what it would be.
And what you're doing with this redevelopment plan as the redevelopment commission is you're giving that coverage to the Board of Aldermen so they can make those decisions about where to invest and have your support and some rigorous analysis behind it in a plan.
I have a question, if I may, please.
Please.
And this doesn't have anything to do with judgment or anything else, but is there anyone sitting in this room that has not ever been in the Duffy Field area? Has everyone in this room ever been in Duffy Field?
I think I.
Okay, And I wasn't asking for any other reason other than just to know if you know the terrain and know the area that we're talking about and the area that we'll be dealing with primarily as it relates to Duffy Field proper. How many streets in your ward in the Duffy Field area have curb and guttering?
0. I mean, in the Duffy Field neighborhood, 0. And that is a concern.
That is a big concern.
Well, you know, except
Correct.
now, you know, if you want to call Duffy Field, you know, 5 points coming off or right there.
0 is acceptable,
Yeah.
because that's what I was getting at.
0
And it's been like that before you, while my father was on the board.
Correct.
But I just wanted to make sure that everybody had had an opportunity to at least have driven through there. And as much as it is an honor to sit on this board with you all, even if I would have not been on this board, I probably would have come in this morning, set up a camera and a bug, just so I could know what was going on. Anyway, because I do have a personal stake, and we have a personal responsibility for next generation and the generations that are going to follow. We have awakened too many mornings to Duffy Field looking like it is and it not changing. And it's time for people to wake up now and to just see Duffy Field looking different. It's got to look different. I just had to get that out. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
I have a question kind of similar from where Riley's coming from. There's been a lot of conversation so far when we're talking about these planning activities about privatization. Is the recommendation from the School of Government that we take these blighted areas and completely privatize? Or privatize them 80%?
I believe there are, I don't know what well, how much is privatized already? No, it's not a recommendation that you privatize anything. It is, I should say, I'll get into this, Marcia didn't, but we are neutral on policy. So we're here, if you say, we want to privatize everything, we'll say, okay, here are the ways you can do that. If you say, we want to make everything public, we'll say, okay, here are the ways you can do that. So that'll be a decision that this commission will make, is how much, what's the right balance. You probably will come to that decision after seeing feasibility, financial feasibility analysis, and you say, well, what's going to make a private sector partner want to come in? That's where a lot of funding is. You're going to want to preserve your funding so you can pay for that community center, so you can pay for street improvements over a larger area. And so you're not going to want to maybe to use all of your public dollars in development and housing if you can attract a private partner.
Because one of my concerns, and one of the concerns of people that I talk to in these communities, is that, and I don't know if this is a rational belief or not, that powers that be in the city of New Bern, not necessarily city government, are attempting to take pieces or the Duffield community and give ownership and control to other people that historically have not been a part of that community. So when I'm hearing the word privatization a great deal and thinking about the example of downtown Durham, where there's a great deal of what some people will call gentrification, I have some concerns about how members of the public will have trust and confidence in this entity and in this process, depending on how that privatization work is tossed around. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Oh, yeah, I mean, oh boy, I get excited about this conversation. I would love to be help you think through these things. I should say though, what we're doing right now is just giving you the overview of your powers and how another city has implemented those powers. And we're drawing on examples, but it is ultimately going to be up to you all. I have seen, for example, in Mount Airy, they used a redevelopment commission to completely privatize everything. Marcia's seen a redevelopment commission in Kinston that has used redevelopment powers to do a mix of both. In the 1950s, redevelopment areas were used in 1960s, they were used to privatize everything and even eliminate entire neighborhoods and redevelop them entirely. So these are all very important considerations. Gentrification is an important consideration if the market suggests that we're going to have that problem. And I don't know what the market analysis would be for this neighborhood. But these are all important questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer all of these great questions that you're asking right now. They require analysis and further discussion over time.
The reason there's 9 on this board too, and you're all from varying backgrounds and whatever, is to bring all of this forward so that in the process, nothing is missed. So that your question of that is important. And you can have discussion among your members with different thoughts to come to an answer, so that it's been vetted by a variety of opinions and not by one opinion. And that's why, too, it takes it away. The Board of Aldermen doesn't want to make those decisions because we tend to be elected. Therefore, we're playing to a group of people that elected us. You are here speaking for the people in the sense of, your backgrounds and what you bring to the table. Well, that's why this is so important to our city, that this body helps to look at those and answer those questions and, debate it and bring it forward and debate it.
And the thought being that we are all vested in the
community
city because we live here.
Correct. You all have to be within the city limits, correct.
When we kind of tie those last four comments all in together, I would venture to say that the ask coming out of that is, can you focus heavily whenever you walk through our tools and what we can do on the types of things that will be allowed to help facilitate the redevelopment without taking that property out of the hands of the people that are in it right now. We don't want to gain a whole lot by moving everybody out of the neighborhood that owns their property. So current homeowners, anything that can be done to improve their experience now without necessarily having to move them out, I think is probably part of what the ask is on that. We want the people that are there now to get some of the benefit off of what's being done, not taking it all to somebody else.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's awesome that y'all are thinking about these things now, sooner than later. I think Durham probably wishes that they thought about these things before redevelopment happened to them.
And I think Jeff is already thinking about it because he's throwing around terms like weatherization,
Right.
which is, that's keeping people in their homes and just fixing their homes and making them more energy efficient. So it's clear that the staff is already talking about this.
You have been prepared for the show.
I absolutely have.
I'll say as a side note, although I shouldn't be doing any more asides though, but
Yeah,
that it's
don't have time for
promising
asides.
that y'all are thinking about this, because I think where gentrification and displacement can happen are communities that don't have the confidence, that believe that neighborhoods can change. And it sounds like y'all are already seeing the future and believing that something can happen and that Duffy Field can transform into the best version of itself. So I think having that confidence is going to be important in planning, because then you'll be putting policies in place that help to preserve and make sure that those longtime residents and those longtime homeowners can stay in their properties through different types of policies or programs you might create.
Land trusts,
Land banking,
weatherization.
or having programs where people are able to freeze their property taxes at a certain rate if they're low income or seniors. So the fact that you're even believing and thinking about that is a really good sign, because it means that you'll be better at helping to preserve the character of the neighborhood relative to other places that just don't believe it can happen until it's too late and they've lost all their powers to enact those tools. Talked about this community meeting. So roles and responsibilities, we've touched on these, but another way to look at these different bodies that are going to interact with the plan. You all, the Redevelopment Commission, you're going to recommend the boundaries and qualifications to the Planning Board. You're going to create that plan and set those goals of what you want this neighborhood to look like, and then you're going to implement them. The Planning Board is going to qualify the URA. They're going to agree with your boundaries and that the way that you're defining the URA and how it meets qualifications are correct. And then eventually they'll recommend your plan for approval. The public, hopefully, is going to be an important part and has been with CNI to this point. They're going to identify needs, give you input on the vision and goals. Sounds like you're already taking things from the public and bringing it to this body to consider. They're going to be your partners and provide you with support and consensus, hopefully, so long as you're doing it in a way that aligns with their vision. Board of Aldermen also plays a very important role. They're going to pass that resolution, ultimately certifying the URA. They're going to help you build consensus, also provide input, hold those public hearings, and it will be up to the Board of Aldermen to approve the final plan. Question, go. Until you got one. No?
No, I'm just thinking about what this looks like.
Okay. All right, Redevelopment Commission. Tyler read the definition earlier. We can skip through this because we're here, so you've got this. You are an independent commission, which actually I think is the best way that it works. In some cities, they actually have redevelopment commissions where the city council or the Board of Aldermen serve as the redevelopment commission as well. I think having an independent commission, in my experience, seems to be more successful for implementation. Something to think about is that if you do own property within the URA, you must disclose that in writing. and that commission members can't have an interest, direct or indirect, in redevelopment projects or properties in the URA. In
Yes, I
con-
need a question. So
Okay.
Mr. Morgan would live in the URI. I'm pretty sure the boundary is going to include that.
Mhm.
Would, he just has to put in writing that I lived there prior, I live there now, and that it's there.
There are disclosure requirements.
There, I just, okay. Is there anybody else that lives in, I don't think so, okay.
Does that, so live or own a property interest?
Yep. You could serve, and I think it's a good idea to have people who actually live there to serve, but you just have to disclose.
I don't have any other interest and no other interest in buying any properties, but I do own the property I live in
Yep.
outright.
So if someone on the commission were to purchase a property in this area during the course of this project, we would obviously, we have a continuing obligation to disclose.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. If we, I mean, it's at the end of my presentation, and it says time permitting, and already time is not permitting.
So this would disqualify me from purchasing any property within the URA that I don't currently own. Just ask.
You'd have to disclose it, I'd have to check. I mean,
That's not a
that's
problem.
something I'd want to look closely at before I just give you an offer.
The idea is that you're not, it's just a
Not in
conflict
for
of
the right.
interest. You're not serving on this board to purchase property, to profit off of that, and that's the reason.
I understand completely. This is not like DOT.
Yeah,
Did you say Neville Tier? What you say?
You cannot acquire an interest, direct or indirect, in any property in a redevelopment area unless you're going to live in that property as your principal residence. And you may not have any interest in contracts related to the redevelopment. You may not have an interest in a contract with a developer or proposed developer for any of these projects. And if you do, you have to also disclose any pre-existing within the previous 2 years ownership or control of property that is within a redevelopment project. So there'll be some disclosures we can talk about.
Absolutely.
Don't look, Tyler, I summarize legal language and you'll. All right, so what kind of tools does the URA provide? So we've alluded to some of these. Already talked about this, building consensus. But here are a few. Tyler's going to go into these in much more detail, so I might just, right?
You can no longer say I'm going to be going into things in great
I
detail
know,
because
because
we're
we're running out of time, right? But,
No.
so this is an important one, and this is one that makes people's ears perk up because of the ED word. But the Redevelopment Commission, and this is one of very few instances in the state of North Carolina, can acquire parcels, only blighted parcels, by eminent domain. The lawyer is like, what? Yeah. Eminent domain, so, yeah, taking the property at market value, you reimburse the property owner, but taking the property without a.
Right.
And I know you're on time, so I'm gonna
Go ahead.
be brief. Perception and reality, two different things, but you know, we work with public trust, so perception is that first reality that you
Yep.
acted on by fact. Just so you know, since you're guiding us through this, we definitely want to protect from that ED word, i.e. from the perception of Trent Court waterfront property. To make sure that didn't happen in Bethfield, and what that perception is, again, I don't know what the fact is on
Right.
that, I'm just going by perception.
Yeah.
But just so you know, that's what we really want to protect against,
Yes.
is entities like that coming in for gain, for that kind of valued property at that time, okay?
I'll say it tends to be a tool that I don't see frequently exercised
Okay.
by redevelopment
I saw it,
commissions
so
in North
I looked right
Carolina.
at you when I saw it, like, hold on.
For that reason.
There it is. So, all right, okay.
For that reason.
I guess one of the issues where you said this, the blighted heirs, we have several properties in the Duffyfield area that could be owned by 20 to 25 heirs, and
Right,
it has
right.
been like that for 30 years,
Right.
empty, abandoned, and in that case, that may be the only solution holding back the redevelopment of the neighborhood. Not that somebody's living in there,
Right.
that would be removed. It's those kind of instances are the only instance I could see where
Would be
that
with
might
that
be
ED.
used, because
Okay.
we've had, lots of issues with trying to contact these people and find out who the heirs are, and it passes from generation to generation, and then nobody responds. It's really difficult, and it can hold up. I'm sure Robbie sees, that in the area that he lives, and it sits there,
Right.
and it attracts
Yeah.
drug dealers and other people who don't need to be in there, and other issues. So the people surrounding it saying, you're devaluing my property because you're allowing this to stay here. So that's the kind of call I'll get from a citizen saying, this house has been here, it's been abandoned for years, nobody's doing anything about it, and it's devaluing my property. And we'll say, well, look, there's 20 heirs, we can't get up with them, so it has to stay like that.
Same thing you're saying with the shrubbery. I mean, your
Yeah.
overgrown properties right next to you, it's gonna be bad.
Yeah.
That was a question I actually was thinking about for Tyler. A blighted parcel could be that type of blighted parcel. It doesn't necessarily have to have a structure on it.
It does.
To be, oh, it does, has to be a structure.
Has
Okay.
to be a structure.
Yep. Yeah. But I have heard of the case in other URAs where there's an heirs property issue or complications with the title, where the heirs say, if an eminent domain is how you have to get it done to get this out of our hands, do it. I mean, it's not unheard of that sometimes that is, believe it or not, the easiest recourse that you have to get a problem property under
And
control.
there's also foreclosing on tax liens.
We
So
debate it.
there are,
Yeah, there are other ways.
yeah, I'll briefly touch on code enforcement, but you have a whole set of tools at the city's disposal that we won't even talk
Can the
about.
redevelopment commission actually be the owner on a tax foreclosure?
Yeah, they can purchase it from
From
tax
the,
foreclosure.
from the city or county.
From the other ledger.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Which
So
the
the body can own property.
Yep,
Yeah.
the redevelopment commission can own property.
So I've got a question.
Yeah.
So when an abatement is done on property and it's not paid by the owner,
Makes sense.
who actually owns it? Does the tax office own it? Does the city own it? Who owns it?
No one owns it until the foreclosure action is taken by the city or county. But if there is, if you keep, the city keeps mowing the grass time after time for a property owner, they can file the cost of mowing that grass plus administrative costs as a lien on the
Right.
property. And eventually, those can add up to be pretty
Right.
significant. And if the city so chooses, or the county, they can take action to initiate foreclosure to collect on that lien.
Okay, and then once they foreclose on that property and they acquire that property, then the city owns it.
City
Yes,
council.
well, they actually put it on the auction block,
Yeah.
the county's, the courthouse steps. And if nobody else buys it, oftentimes the city will be ready to come in and buy it for whatever residual costs they put into it, and then the city will own it. But it could be that someone else comes along and says, that's a great opportunity. I'm
What-
gonna put it in
And what
bid.
time frame are we talking about? Because I'm working up to something I'm gonna share with you in just a moment. So what time frame are we talking about here, or is there a time frame?
It just depends, where it becomes feasible for the city and county to lend their attorney and the cost of their attorney to sue for collection of back taxes. So
Okay.
usually, it's gotta be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. For $1,000, they're not gonna initiate something
Okay.
like
Or
that.
maybe a package of properties within an
Yeah,
area.
usually that's what we do, and on most cases within the city, we ask the county to bow out, and,
Because we tore the house down.
we've either torn the house down or we've done something, and the lien's on there, and we say to the county, okay, you're owed $2,000, and we're owed, $8,000, or whatever it is. Will you bow out, and then we just own the property, and in most cases, they do.
In our targeted area that we're talking about, how many properties does the city of New Bern own in that area?
I want to say right now, we were at about 100 and something, but I think right now we might be 80s.
70, 80.
Yeah, 70, 80, somewhere in there. Now, we've, a lot of those properties though, Robbie, are FEMA acquired properties where FEMA bought it out, which means you cannot build on it, so they have to be green spaces.
Oh, okay.
So there's an issue with some of that.
We have plenty.
They do have plenty, but I will say, because my friend Katia is sitting behind me, and I have to give due respect to Habitat for Humanity, the city has been working with Habitat and giving them properties so they could build. Last year, I believe we did 10 properties. They would like to come in and work with they will be a partner, I hope, with this redevelopment commission and acquiring additional properties so that they can build.
And the reason and what I was working up to was because we've seen it time and time again that the city has taken liens, taken abatements, taken liens. Then they'll come in, they will acquire the house, acquire the property, they will board it up, and then just put it over to the side because they've already got it and they acquired it.
No, that's not how that works.
It used to be that
Okay.
way.
And
No,
that's the way
I
that
agree
we've
with that.
seen it and that's the way
Correct.
we've lived with
We
it.
don't,
Now we don't do anything like that.
we're getting off topic here, but now with the house.
Okay, yeah. and-
Yeah, but we go in, look at the house with our inspectors and say, is this something we need to tear down or can we sell it? And we've sold 5, 6 houses that we've gotten, that we've turned back and put them up for sale that they have been purchased because they're rehabable, able to be rehabbed. But most of the time, 95% of the time, the houses we get are tear downs. So we
Right.
don't board them up anymore
Okay.
and leave them there. I go in and tear them down.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for getting off topic.
Sorry,
It's
these are-
all
these are
relevant.
important.
Yeah. See here some additional powers of the redevelopment commission: demolition, building removal, make site improvements, site preparation, enter into contracts for construction, repair, demolition. Again, you can see these activities are expensive and there needs to be some sort of budget behind it. So that is where that financial feasibility plan comes into play. You can also engage in programs of assistance and financing, giving loans irrespective of job creation. And I'm sure Tyler will talk about this, that there are a few instances in North Carolina where you can make loans or engage in financing without regard for some sort of job creation aspect. But a URA is unique in that you can do it just because it's in a URA. It doesn't have to have any job creation component. So that's an exciting superpower that you have so long as you're exercising it in line with the redevelopment plan goals. Some examples: matching grants for rehab, for homeowners, making loans for infill development.
Are these loans, can they be interest-free?
It depends. For affordable housing, yes, if you get something in exchange. We can talk about that
Okay.
later if you're really interested in an interest-free loan.
Just wondering.
There are some business reasons why you would never want to give an interest-free loan. But
Well, we'll get the question.
Right. Yeah. Something else worth noting is that you do still have to sell a property if the redevelopment commission owns a property. We talked about that example before of the city foreclosing, the redevelopment commission then becoming the owner, buying that property at auction. If you were to then want to convey that property to a private owner, you would still have to use competitive bidding procedures. And most instances, there's some affordable housing or other instances where you wouldn't. But what's exciting about if it's in a URA is that you're able to encumber that parcel with covenants to uphold your redevelopment goals as the redevelopment commission. So back to that question you had earlier, maybe about how do we have protections to make sure that we're not letting just anybody come in here, I'll just kind of use the nastiest example, just to make a profit or become a slumlord, or how do we protect to make sure that as we're turning properties over to the private sector, that they're partners that are going to keep up with our plan. This is how you do it as a redevelopment commission, and this is a pretty unique power to encumber that parcel with a restrictive covenant. That could be things like this, saying you have to rehab this property within a certain amount of time if you're going to bid on it. Or it has to be owner occupied for a
Do you
certain
put
amount of time.
affordability clauses in that, or is that in a
Yes.
different way?
in
Yeah.
fact,
Yep.
that's implied there.
Yeah.
That's when you can provide those grants, is to make projects affordable.
Yeah. So it still has to be competitive bidding, but with these kind of covenants or restrictions, you're going to narrow the field of people who are interested in that, right? So
Can you offer the property though? Could you not work with a Habitat or with somebody else to say, look, we're going to give you this property, but you must build this, this, and this to achieve the goals,
Yep.
rather than competitively bid?
yes.
Okay.
The special instance where you don't have to follow competitive bidding is when it is for affordable housing for low or moderate income persons. Now, there's lots of rules and requirements around that to ensure that you're keeping up with it. I'm very nervous when I'm summarizing legal statute in front of Tyler, but usually I do this without him here. But yeah. So, but yes, with a Habitat or a partner that's serving low or moderate income people. Yep. And again, we talked about this tool, sending that signal that you're serious about redevelopment. Because why would an owner, a homeowner, want to buy a property, right? Unless they knew that you had a plan in place where this was an area that they want to be investing in, right? You're showing people that you're going to protect their investment. What does it not do? We talked about this. Doesn't guarantee any funding. It does not allow for private sale with non-monetary consideration unless it's for affordable housing for lower moderate income persons. Doesn't allow for private sale for fair market value.
Private sale meaning where you choose the buyer. So competitive bidding means anyone can buy the property. But if you do private sale, it means, oh, developer X, we want you. You can't do that in a redevelopment area. You can imagine the reason. If you have the power of eminent domain, you can imagine a long time ago someone could just eminent domain, take all this property and then say, my buddy Joe is going to be the developer who's going to redevelop all this. So it protects against that.
But again, there's that unless for a public purpose. Additional considerations. So with all of these tools, with all of these special powers you have, they must be in alignment with the URA plan. So they have to align with those goals and objectives. So that's something you're going to want to pay close attention to. Make sure the goals in the C&I plan are the ones that still make sense to you all, because those are really going to be your values, your gut checks to make sure you're on the right track. Case studies. It's 10:44. We started a little bit late. Can I keep us for 5 more minutes? I don't think I have too much more. Is that okay?
You need to keep us for 10 minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay. All right. Kinston. So you heard me describe this area. It's called Mitchelltown. It's right next to downtown Kinston. Historic mill neighborhood. Lots of blighted homes, heirs properties, perceived safety issues. At the time, 1 in 4 homes were vacant. 25% of all homes were vacant or distressed. So very high vacancy rate.
Is that on the 11 side? Highway 11 side?
Highway 11 side.
As you come into Kinston, Highway 11?
Not East Kinston,
Okay, so
but West Kinston. It's on the riverside, if that makes sense. So no,
I
not.
thought you had that side on this side.
Come again?
I thought you had that side on this side.
Well, that's next up for the URA.
Oh, all right.
So
I was just making sure.
the vacancy rate there is more upwards of 40 to 50%. So we thought, let's first test it here where it's 5%.
Okay.
To see if we can make it work in a smaller area that's not as distressed. And so actually this year, we're going to be helping them set up a URA for the east side.
BBs before the cannonball, right?
Exactly.
And that's part of the strategy that you all can choose too. I mean, that was what Marcia mentioned at the beginning. Do you go right for the hardcore, hardest hit area, or do you say, you know what, we think the opportunity is actually on the fringe. And so given our financial feasibility and given the interest in the market, then we could probably make a bigger dent if we go on the fringe rather than going in the spot where private investment's going to say, whoa, we're not even sure we're ready to go there yet.
Small victories.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is a strategy for you all to decide.
Progress, not
Lots of frustration when the city hired us to help with the urban redevelopment area. A resident had taken all the trash that she'd collected in her front yard and came and dumped it in front of the city council at a meeting. So a lot of frustration and dramatics. Serena's like, oh gosh, don't give anyone any idea, please.
Turn the camera off.
This is not a good time to talk about trash.
Fair enough. But a lot of frustration among residents. But some momentum with downtown revitalization, and there were some stakeholders that were interested in bringing artists to the neighborhood. Kinston was having a more vibrant art scene, and they wanted to see that. But the city didn't have a lot of resources to put towards this. Kinston didn't have a strong tax base. When you have that much vacant housing, there's not a lot of revenue for you to work from, so they were pretty hamstrung in terms of what they could do. So what did they do? Did an extensive process. I talked earlier about all the data collection that helped to challenge some of the assumptions in terms of who were the big bad people behind those properties, those problem properties, and learned that actually it was a lot of local people. Through this, we learned that the code enforcement department in Kinston felt pretty disempowered, that the city didn't have their back when it came to doing enforcement. So that was a really important cultural shift that we helped to bring about to help give the code enforcement department some more teeth and to let them know that they would be supported in trying to do community development.
You can understand how that happened. You have a code enforcement issue. Eventually, the city council has to approve it, and the owner comes and says, please give me more time.
Right.
And so the Board of Aldermen's left to go, we'll try to give you some more time, but then the neighbors, the residents say, please, act now. So that you can see how that would slow
Especially
things
if you
down.
play golf with them or whatever. Did some zoning overlays to allow for artists to live in these houses and have live-work studios, so that was an important accomplishment to help with the relocation and the vacant houses. Did a community survey by mails. An advantage that Kinston had that y'all have too is that because they have their own public utility, they're able to put mailers in everybody's utility bill and really get a lot of information out there, so we were able to do a lot of outreach that way. 3 community meetings at a neighborhood church. Plan was approved and now underway. The vacancy rate is now more like 10% 5 years later, so big turnaround. Yep. Another example, this is more of a commercial example, so something I didn't mention is that a redevelopment area can be a commercial, a residential area, or a combination of the two. So it can be both. I know that this is kind of a combo that y'all are considering here with the 5 Points area will be perhaps commercial and residential, so I thought Douglas Block and Rocky Mount is a good example. It was a block, the downtown, if y'all have been to Rocky Mount, you know it's got very high vacancy. And it really needed a transformative project. There was this particular block, the Historic African American Business District. There was a CDC in place that was very well respected, well established, a partner of the city. It actually started as an oral history project, which many of these redevelopment projects actually do. Are you into oral history?
Oh, yeah.
Me too. Yeah. I think it can be a great way in an area that is very problem focused, where everybody's just talking about what's wrong and what's bad, to help reset the mindset to what's positive and what was special about an area. So I think oral history can be a really powerful tool in helping to get more of an optimistic and asset-focused community development mindset.
Can
which
a
is the case
second
here.
oral history project assist us with that agency?
Well, I mean, we've been talking with them about other stuff. I'll say not cheap. I'm trying to get them to help right now with something in Kinston. But I can certainly help lend my contacts because there are always graduate students looking for master's theses and projects. So we'll talk more offline if you want to hear more. So what was the process there? Oral history, charrette, meetings, environmental assessment. There were some environmental brownfields issues with these properties. But keep in mind, this was one city block, so it was a much more contained, smaller URA. So just one city block. A lot of different partners engaged, like Parks and Rec. The city acquired the parcels, then conveyed them to the CDC, and here was some of the financing behind it. It was an $8 million redevelopment of this entire block in total. It included ground floor commercial with actually market rate apartments on the top floors, financed through historic tax credits, new market tax credits, HUD loans, and public investment. This was the amount of public investment of the $8 million though. So you see they were able to leverage a lot of private investment with that public investment. And it's a total of 6 buildings with about 25,000 square feet for commercial tenants. This might be a little bit old, but this was a pretty high or a good rate to get. And actually getting commercial tenants in downtown Rocky Mount was a big coup. And also market rate apartments. And these were actually the first market rate apartments in downtown Rocky Mount, where it was at this property. Something worth noting with Parks and Rec is you might have noticed in the last slide there was the Booker T Theater. So another way that the public invested, it isn't listed here in this 500,000 or so, is that Parks and Rec actually took over operation of that Booker T Theater and programmed it as a recreation facility through the city. So that was another important long-term public
So
investment.
they paid rent.
They pay rent and they program it, and so not captured in that 500,000, but certainly an important thing. You gotta go. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Okay. All right, another case is in Mooresville, which is outside of the Charlotte area, more or less, if y'all are familiar. They did a URA for a historic, yet declining downtown neighborhood. Their focus was really on helping to rehab homes for first-time home buyers. So if that's something of interest to y'all, the Mooresville example, I think I put in the Dropbox folder of too many resources for you to read on, but the full Mooresville plan is there if you're interested. Greenville is another one where they did a URA for a neighborhood that's adjacent to downtown. That focused on housing rehab, but also small business assistance signage in a community center. I think that there have been some challenges, though, similar to the vein of what you talked about earlier that we've heard about in Greenville, that perhaps, especially for the commercial area, it's resulted in maybe some displacement. There's a perception around that. So maybe there's some lessons to be learned from Greenville's story. And a perception that all of the homeownership programs, not all, but I've heard this anecdotally from Greenville staff, that they would have folks who lived in the neighborhood that was the focus of the URA go through the homeownership program, but then decide to take those skills and what they learned and buy homes elsewhere outside of the URA. So that's something to think about. It seems like for many homeowners, or many potential homeowners, the city didn't quite make the case that this neighborhood was one to invest in. There's also some fraternities that got located in the middle of that commercial district, so that perhaps could be part of it. A little strange, yeah. Little bit. Yeah. Sanford did a commercial URA in their downtown to actually turn an old railroad depot into a park and museum. So again, another example of a very small URA for a specific project. So you can see the scopes can be really large, very concentrated. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. Here are all the required elements of a URA plan, and these are things that are actually required in the statute. So remember, Chapter 160A-Article 22 will outline all of these. I think you do have quite a few of these in your C&I plan when I was scanning through, but you're going to want to make sure you have all these elements and that they're updated and that they still resonate with you. Other elements that I've seen in URA plans, these aren't required, but I think these are good ones to have. The history of the area, the reason, community involvement, documentation of that, goals and objectives. Here's some examples from Kinston and from Greenville's plans. Boundaries and existing land use is a required element of the plan. It sounds like something that you've got with all that data that the intern has been collecting, so you'll hopefully have lots of maps like this, equally complex, that tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the properties. This is going to be really important, not only in setting your goals, but in helping to qualify that URA, to determine the boundaries and make sure that it meets the requirements of the statute. Okay. Okay. I'm almost done, I think. Yep. If y'all have a few more minutes, are you good? Yep. Okay. Keep going. Standards of population densities, land coverage, building intensity, so any proposed zoning changes, what the densities would be. Again, these are things I think I've seen in the C&I plan, that there's some of this is proposed if there's any changes. Some
intensities, that was that floor area ratio, is that part of it? Do we need to put that in?
Well, I mean, I think it's essentially goes along with your zoning, how you define the zoning, like lot sizes or things like that.
What
right,
is,
things you're going to already
not
have.
what it's already there.
Right.
Okay, because that's a pain.
Right. No, not what's already there,
Yeah,
but what you hope it will be.
Gotcha.
Yeah. If there's going to be any changes to your UDO in terms of what's the minimum square foot of a house, or if multifamily dwellings are allowed, that's essentially what that's saying. Building intensities and densities. Preliminary site plan, if you have that. I've seen that in your C&I plan. Any proposed changes in zoning? Proposed changes in street layouts or street levels? And estimated costs and financing. So here's just a snapshot of, I think this is from Greenville, of their pro forma to do redevelopment for the neighborhood. A lot of work goes in behind these, but a snapshot of what that might look like. Statement of continuing controls. This brings up something you had mentioned earlier about code enforcement. You can state in your URA plan that you are going to do more targeted or proactive code enforcement in this area. And it's important. If this is a goal of yours that you want to do more targeted code enforcement, state it, because I'll say right now in Kinston, we're going back to our URA plan to do more targeted code enforcement, to make sure we have the legal coverage to say, we're not just singling out this property owner, but we've got coverage from our URA plan. So something very important, if that's going to be important to you all, put that in there. And these are maps, actually, from Greenville and from Kinston of high-frequency violators of code.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Those are fun ones, yeah. Your proposed implementation and phasing, so especially in the case of Duffyfield, it's a big area, so y'all are gonna have to think thoughtfully of what your strategy is and where you're gonna start. And these are my next steps that I would propose to you all. You've already got the redevelopment commission covered, so that's great. But next up, we'll be thinking about boundaries and qualifying the URA, community involvement, and how do you get community input on this plan, any challenges, what data you have, what data remains to be collected, the roles of the stakeholders, and who will write and repackage the plan. I get that you have this, but you're probably going to want to repackage it a little bit, so the responsibility is that. You'll be answering a lot more questions as time marches on, but these are probably the ones you're going to be contending with between now and that January 1 deadline. Yeah. And that's it for me. Thank you. Or if you have questions.
Will we have access to these slides?
Yes, you will. You've got access to a Dropbox folder that we put together that's got more information than you ever wanted to know about URA. So yes, we'll
And
put those slides.
Jeff can direct us to that Dropbox information.
Yeah, I
Yep.
forwarded it in an email. I'll do it again.
So you're sending all this in an email, right?
Nope, it didn't
It's the
change.
It's the same
link.
Dropbox.
Yeah.
I'll send it out again.
So you'll see it's a link to a website where you can download whatever files, and you don't even have to have to.
You don't have to add that.
You do not. Yeah, for this link, you can visit it through the web and download whatever.
Yeah, I
you want.
downloaded it.
I'd say if you have Dropbox, it's nice because that way you
Yeah.
don't have to download it all. It just will live in your Dropbox. You can just
Exactly.
copy it. But if you
Very
don't,
informative.
it's fine. That's it.
Okay, why don't we take a break? It's 11. We're building on what Marcia already talked to you about. And that's important because you're going to see me go through a URA plan again. You're going to see me go through the phases. And the idea is repetition leads to learning. So Marcia gave you the overview. She talked about general terms. Now I'm going to give you specific statutory references. I'm going to give you general statute numbers so you can start highlighting them in your book. And you'll see, let's go through these materials quickly. The first is, by the way, just courses that we offer at the school that are related to this topic, and information about DFI, which is what Marcia and I are in. But you'll see there's basically a 4-page document, 2 pages, double-sided, that takes the statutory provisions and talks about the process and powers of redevelopment commission. And that's just right after the blue. So if you pull the blue apart, it should be right after that, unless I stuck something else in there. Got it? Okay. So you might put this to the side. The 2-page, which is 4 pages, or 2 pages front and back, total 4. You might just put that one to the side, and I'll put it to the side too, because that will have the statutes listed. I decided not to print out all 27 pages of statutes. They're in that book, and the full 27 pages are included in that Dropbox link. So you can just download them all at once. And I actually do recommend you all get used to those, become friends with that statute, Article 22. After that, there are a series of 1-pagers. Maybe this is the next one. Do you see it's colored? All right, we'll just stop. Oh, wait, okay. And so there are a few single pages, then a blue one with the chart with red checks, and then this block with the steps, and then you have the slides. So you have my slides. So the reason you have my slides is trying to give you, I understand that you're not always going to be able to just give me a call, and sometimes I'm teaching and I can't answer the call right away. So you've got a 2-page document with your process and powers. Then if you want, you've got a little bit more detail in the presentation that I'm going to be giving this afternoon. And then if you want more detail, then you either have to steal Jamie's book from her, or you have to print out Article 22 on your own, the 27 pages. These are resources that hopefully will prove useful to you over time. Any questions about the resources before we get going? Okay.
Real quick, so
Yes.
on the first page, the blue UNC government page, there are a series of courses. Are those the ones that are on demand?
No, the on-demand is a different set, and frankly, the on-demand aren't as relevant to what you all need to know, unless you're interested in the public records and open meetings requirements. But no, these are not on-demand. The Community Development Academy happens in March. The basic economic development course happens at the end of July. The essentials of economic development course will be out here in the east, I think in May. And the development finance toolbox course is coming up in December.
And those courses are available at cost.
At a cost, yes. Yeah, they're not funded by the state.
There are scholarships.
Not for
those.
not for all of them. Maybe not. Probably for this group. It's like a manager and elected
Okay.
official line. Okay, let's.
And this is the only number to get to you, this 919-962 number? That's the only one we got to you?
That's it in my email. Email's better for me.
Email's better, okay.
Yeah, because then I can access it from anywhere and I can respond at any time. Okay. Other questions? Okay, let's get going. Here's what I'm going to try to do over the next, I'd say, if you give me a little extra time, the next hour and 20 minutes or so is the idea. We're gonna talk about the legal requirements for creating the plan, because you don't have any powers. Let me say it again. You don't have any powers until you create this redevelopment plan. So this is goal number one, and so we got to get you past this. Once you've created your redevelopment plan, you have a certain number of powers that are statutorily provided to you, and we'll discuss how you use those powers. Okay, but basically, you're going to be able to acquire property, you're going to be able to improve that property or hold it, you're going to be able to finance folks to help them come and invest in the project alongside of you. You convey property to developers, so you have those powers at your disposal, and we'll talk about approaches, well, I think that's next, approaches for how community development folks think about the use of these powers. And so I'll give you two. I'm going to take you through the land banking approach so that you understand this idea of what do you mean you're going to acquire property and sell it, and hold it, improve it, finance, what are you talking about? We will go over the land banking approach. And then the idea is, if I have time, I also want to go through the private real estate developer approach. So there's the community-based land banking approach, and then there's how does a private developer approach this? And you ought to be thinking about both of those. Not just because you're going to be dealing with private developers in most cases, in many cases, but also because you need to think like a private developer. You have all the powers of a private developer. I tell local government officials this, they are in the private real estate development game because they get all their revenues from private development. So government officials need to think like private developers too. So I'm going to show you how that thinking process is done so that you can be at the table with them as equals. And that's what DFI, that's what we're committed to. We will get to conflicts of interest, but I might skip it because it sounds like it might not be too big of a deal. I got a chance to read them earlier to you, and I can answer questions for Robbie offline. And then you already get this. You're already asking questions all the time. And I talked to you about the neutral approach. I'm going to talk to you about your powers. This does not mean that I'm telling you you must use all these powers. I am simply giving you the legal options that are at your disposal so that you can decide whether and when to use those powers. Is that clear? The school of government's it's really important because you might have folks who are, look, government doesn't have any role doing this at all. What the heck is government doing in this neighborhood, messing around? And you'll have other folks who say, no, government is absolutely the right folks because there's transparency and accountability and elected officials and they have the financing. So you'll have different perspectives. I'm not going to get in the middle of that debate, but I'm going to give you the powers that the statutes have authorized for you. Any questions about how we're going to proceed? Okay, great. All right, some basics. As you all, I read it, you are like a mini board of aldermen, right? You are a body politic and corporate. You have, you are a state entity. And your powers are derived under the North Carolina Constitution entirely by the statutes, entirely by that Article 22 of General Statutes, Chapter 168. In that, those statutes are all we got. We have some case law where folks took cities to court and said, argued over definitions or argued over the powers of redevelopment commission and said, wait, the Constitution couldn't have meant that, statute couldn't have meant that. There are some cases out there, but in general, you just got to stick to the boundaries of that statutory the statutory set that is in Article 22. Now, the supreme law of the land is, in the state of North Carolina, is the state constitution. Above that is obviously the U.S. Constitution, which is the absolute supreme law of the land. But in the state of North Carolina, all powers are derived subject to the Constitution. And the reason I mention this is because your statute doesn't have everything that you need to know. There are several different things that the Constitution of North Carolina tells you, and you need to be aware of them. One is exclusive emoluments. Basically what that means is you can't give gifts. So no gifts is what that means. So if there's an idea, oh, we're going to have a redevelopment commission, we're going to buy up some property, and then we're going to give it to our friends, or we're going to give it to a private developer because we like that guy, that is not allowed under the Constitution. I know you've heard about economic development incentives. There's competition with Texas. That's a different case. You're not competing with Texas in Duffield. You are simply trying to make the market work in this redevelopment area. So get the idea of giving cash and land away. The Constitution says you can't do it. Also, the statute says so, but we'll get to where the statute also says you can't do that. You have to, if you're going to spend money, have to use it for a public purpose. So again, you can't spend the Redevelopment Commission's money on helping out some private sector person. That's not how you're supposed to be doing, spending your money for public purposes only. And you also, you may not believe this, you have the ability to go get a loan. You have the ability to get financing as a redevelopment commission. Your ability to do that, you are not allowed to lend to others. So you must, if you get a loan, it's for your purposes. You can't then say to a developer, hey, we'll help you with your loan. Developer, you can't do that. And then the law of the land clause says it applies basically due process and equal protection to the activities of government. And so it's, even if it doesn't say it specifically, you've got to make sure you're fair, and you got to make sure that you don't discriminate against protected classes, such as race, religion, gender. Yes?
Jumping back to the no loan credit, is that a situation where you have money of different colors, or does fungibility come into play? I.e., could we borrow money as well as extend credit, just not have it be the same dollars? Or is it an assumed fungibility?
Yeah, the extension of credit. So, for example, I'm going to get technical here. Credit enhancement might be what you're thinking about. So a developer, here's the typical scenario. A developer comes in and says, hey, I'm ready to build a bunch of single-family homes, small sizes, fit in with the character of the community. It's going to be affordable to the folks you want it to be affordable to, but I'm having trouble getting a loan from the bank, and I don't want to put my beach house up as collateral. Local government, can you provide a guarantee? Go to the bank and say that if I don't pay my loan back, that you'll pay the loan back. That provision says, no, you cannot offer that guarantee. However, you could create something like a loan loss reserve, which is not, so you're not lending your good credit, you're just creating a pot of money that you say, up to $300,000, if there's a problem, you can dip into this loan loss reserve. So I just went deep. We don't have to get into the technicalities of that if you're good with that answer. We'll keep going. But the point is, you've got to be careful with your financing. Use it for yourself, not necessarily for others. Yes.
One brief question. If someone sues us, who represents us?
You. So you have a budget, and the city, not you personally.
Okay.
Not you personally. I forgot I was talking to a lawyer. The redevelopment commission would need to allocate funding, or the city would have to allocate funding for defending. It will probably be the city attorney who would start that off. Yeah. I didn't mean to suggest that you personally. Forgot, Jake. Sorry. You're right. And then, of course, U.S. Constitution. So I wanted you to have that foundation. The reason why we talk about the law is because your authority in this country is rooted in the law, if we believe in the rule of law. So, questions about your foundations? Get into the statute. I already said this, so I'll be quick. Your redevelopment plan is the absolute first step because you don't have any other powers after that point. Redevelopment Commission, I'll use RC. Redevelopment Commission is authorized to act upon approval by the Board of Aldermen of the redevelopment plan that you propose. And so I wanted just a quick overview of the approval process, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. You form the RC, and then this is why we're getting, who starts the process for the redevelopment plan. Technically, the planning commission starts. However, I'll talk to you in a bit about you all procure a certification of redevelopment area. So I think you get to start the process. That's an interpretation that I have, and I imagine that Scott Davis shares that interpretation. But the point is, you can initiate saying, here's what we think is the redevelopment plan. This is what we think is the redevelopment area. So they have to certify it. I think you lead the way by asking them to certify the area you've chosen. After the area's been certified, you're going to draft your plan. We've talked about the elements of that plan. Then the planning commission will comment. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, so the planning commission is not recommending the boundary to the Board of Aldermen for approval. They are setting the boundary. It's not, in some of the planning board I know, it's a recommendation process, and they can say no and you can kind of push forward if you choose. It's not that situation. It has to be an affirmative vote.
It is an affirmative vote. Now, it can be modified by the governing board eventually.
Okay.
So even if they do, well, we can be an affirmative vote if this body proposes and says we would like to procure your certification. So it can be just an approval.
Okay, so they don't necessarily have to say yes. We can. The planning board doesn't necessarily have to say yes.
They don't necessarily have to say yes, and they can fight you all the way by saying, after you've done your redevelopment plan, they can say, we think this is the worst redevelopment plan in the world, we think you ought to gut this part, but now, you'll have to see what their attitudes are like, but generally they tend to just approve it. So you'll have to, that's a political thing I can't help you with.
I know that. I just want to be clear that if they were to say no every step of the way, it's all advisory and we could just keep pushing.
It's all advisory.
Okay.
It's all advisory, otherwise we have to use quasi-judicial procedures.
Right. Thank you.
So you can see right there the city of Raleigh is in 2004, how quickly they went through between the time that the planning commission made a recommendation, you can see adopted by the Raleigh City Council in September. So they moved in a few months, so it could possibly be done. Let me see here, keep going. Governing board will approve it, and they can modify it. And then this is where we talk about the partnership. So you all can't do anything until your redevelopment plan is approved by the governing board. But remember that the city can do stuff whenever they want. At any time, they can come into your redevelopment area and they can say, we're going to buy the whole central piece of your redevelopment area right now. They can do whatever they'd like at any time, regardless of the redevelopment commission rules. Okay? So you just need to know that they're a powerful partner and they're not bound necessarily by the same rules you are. So that may be important later if you have strategic issues you're trying to, or tactical, it's more like it. With the acquisition and disposition of property. That's right.
Have you ever seen anything like that take place?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that is what happened in Mount Airy, but it was planned. It was cooperative. So the redevelopment commission did not want to own the property, and the city did not want the redevelopment commission to own the property. The city went ahead, bought the major piece of property, and held it, and said, we'll be disposing of it according to the way the redevelopment commission wants to.
So it was not anything hostile?
Not at that point, no.
Have you ever known of a hostile situation?
This is redevelopment. So there's bound to be disagreement. Hostile brings back, it's gonna give me PTSD. It's more of there'll be different ideas.
Cooperative situation.
Yes, there could be times, but remember, you all are appointed by the Board of Aldermen. So the idea is that this is a board that's responsive to their needs, but you're outside of the political process, which Sabrina mentioned, which is you all can have debates that maybe they would not feel like they could.
Okay. Can the Board of Aldermen fire any one of us or all of us?
Let me get back to you on that. I didn't come prepared to tell you whether you could be fired. You can be removed for cause if there's misconduct. So if you start messing around, I know that for sure. If you say, oh, I've just started a redevelopment business here on the side, and I plan on buying some properties and investing in them because I'm on the redevelopment commission and I know what's coming next. That would be a problem, and you could be fired. That's misconduct.
So anything unethical, immoral, or illegal, but not just a disagreement with our
Yeah, not just a
Our alderman
disagreement.
that appointed us,
Yeah, I have-
it just can't be one of them, just.
Right, let me look at that. I did not come prepared to answer that question. So I'll try, what I'll do is I'll stay after, and I'll look at it and see if I can get you the answer right away.
Sorry.
I've never had the redevelopment commission ask me that question, right, day one.
It's commission security, so.
Yes, but it's a legitimate question. Okay, so just remember they're a partner out there. Now, this is why I think you can start the ball rolling, is this phrase right here. You are empowered to procure from the planning commission the designation of areas that need redevelopment. So that's how come you're going to start it. And then 512 is the specific statutory reference. And again, that's my interpretation of what procure means. I'm interpreting that you can say, we want you, planning commission, just to look at this area and certify it. Can they go off the reservation? Sure, they can. But ideally, they will take your recommendation, you've studied it intensely, and they'll work within those boundaries. Questions on that?
Everything in that boundary has to meet the definition of blight.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. It's a little bit beyond blight. It's
Yeah.
also, if you've read Tom Clancy, it's a clear or present danger of becoming blight, and we're not really sure what that means, but somebody must have been reading
Go
Tom
right down
Clancy.
into Carolina colors.
Look out, Ken.
Across the table now.
So then, now here's the deal. Once it is certified, once an area is certified by the planning commission, you shall prepare a plan. You shall. So if they go outside of the boundaries you want, that's because they believe you need to include those areas, and you will include that in your plan. Now, ultimately, you could recommend that be removed. The governing board could remove it. The governing board always has the ability to modify the plan in the end. But the statute says if the planning commission tells you that this is a redevelopment area, you got to make a plan for it.
So we don't have the ability to change the plan,
You can make recommendations though, as to how it shall change.
to be
Well,
approved
wait,
by.
you make the plan.
We make the plan.
But you don't have
we send in
ability
the
to
plan,
change the area.
And planning says, well, no, you need a bigger circle. We can't say, we're not doing a bigger circle.
Right, you can't. But you could say, our plan is to do it in multiple phases. And phase one is to handle the smaller circle. Phase two is to do the bigger circle, and push those things out into the future. And the governing board could just say, we're removing the bigger circle altogether, we're just going with smaller. But you could adjust for that in the details of the plan.
The boundary, would that essentially, would that be an item on an agenda and then later the plan, or the boundary and the plan is one?
Boundary.
Yeah, the governing board does not approve the boundary until they're approving the plan.
Gotcha, so it's just one item.
It's one item, it's going to come in one package.
Oh.
But there, by the way, that was an issue in Mount Airy, is what was going to be the boundary.
Yeah.
And there was
Wasting a lot of time.
There was some time spent
Yeah.
outside of meetings talking to folks about what the city council wanted the plan to be. In fact, city council made also public statements. We intend only to consider this area for a redevelopment area. And so both the planning commission and the redevelopment commission got the point that if they made some bigger area,
Wasting time.
the governing board was going to ignore it. Any questions?
Does the plan have to designate exactly which tools out of the toolbox we intend to use as a part of that plan, or does it simply say we want to focus on doing A, B, C, D within this circle? Does it have to spell out exactly which tools we want to use to do that? Or-
When you say tools, if you're going into thinking about like code enforcement or financing things, so you do have to have a financial plan. So yes, you do have to specify that. If you're going to use continuing controls, must actually be part of the plan. So yes, you'd be saying we intend to make sure that there's code enforcement in this area, and so yes, I would assume we can go through those elements again. But you remember Marcia put up those elements; they all need to be there, and it's pretty specific.
And if a different tool is going to be used than initially thought, we have to go back through the approval process.
If it's a modification that is significant, and the definition of significant, I actually have a slide on that. We'll look at the exact language, but it's a little bit tough to give you an exact answer. But if you go too big, then yeah, it has to go back before public hearing, and because otherwise it means that there are changes being made that the public hasn't had a chance to comment on. So in the furtherance of transparency, that would be.
Is there a statutory time frame in which the plan shall be prepared?
No, not that I'm aware of. So I'm not aware of any time. So you could take a long time.
As long as it's done by January.
As long as it's
And then we have to get to the question of whether you get fired.
Right, exactly.
Now, we've thrown around the term blighted, but I need to get into more detail here. When the Planning Commission, in specific, the Planning Commission must determine the redevelopment area. And a redevelopment area is one of these three things, and we're going to have to go through each one of them because they're each different. The first is a blighted area, and that's the term I used with you first, and we'll get into the definition of that. The second is, and blighted areas tend to be more residential or a lot of buildings. 2/3 of the buildings are blighted. A non-residential redevelopment area is just what it says, it's commercial space. So if you don't have a bunch of houses, then it's a lower standard, only 50% of the commercial buildings have to meet the standard of blight. And then if you're concerned, not that it's blighted right at this moment, but that it will become, it's in clear present danger of becoming blighted, that's a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning area. You are entitled to make a plan for any one of those three areas, and the Planning Commission is entitled to say which of these areas are within the bounds of your area.
So our one plan can have 3 bubbles?
It could.
Each, well, this one's blighted, this one's non-residential, this is rehab.
And the Planning Commission may also go into parcel by parcel analysis if eminent domain is an issue. And so let me go into that. So here is, so remember, the most severe is a blighted area, but we have 3 areas. So let's go to the first one, which is blighted area. The Planning Commission must find at least 2/3 of the number of buildings substantially contribute to the conditions making it blighted. So it's not okay if you go in a neighborhood and only 20% of the buildings are blighted. 2/3 of the buildings must be blighted. But again, the Planning Commission is going to make that determination, not you all. But the reason you care is because when you procure the Planning Commission certification, you're going to want to have fleshed it out for them so that it's easy for them to just say, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense what they propose. And we talked about eminent domain, the power of a local government to come in and tell an owner, we are using our supreme power to take your land away. We're going to pay you a fair price for that land. So we're not just taking it away for nothing. We'll pay you, but we are taking it from you, and you don't get to be the owner anymore. If the Planning Commission says that a parcel is blighted and they have to decide at the parcel level, then you may use eminent domain for that specific parcel, and the owner, if they choose, gets an attorney to represent them, and you foot the bill for that attorney for the other side. Again, trying to make it as fair as possible for the folks who are subject to these powers of the Redevelopment Commission. Now let's go to the next, here, we have what is a blighted area? Let's go, I'm just going to pull these up. So, predominance of buildings or improvements, so meaning it's not a green space. That's why I said when you were asking about, well, what about the areas that are full of brush, overgrown? That's not going to be a redevelopment area. Or residential in character. So if it's a neighborhood and there are several overgrown lots, so that's okay because it's a neighborhood that's residential in character. But here's the key. Substantially impairs the sound growth of the community. There's the things I read earlier, ill health, transmission of disease, infant mortality, juvenile delinquency and crime. So it does get into some of the demographic or social issues that Robbie was suggesting earlier. And you have to find it's detrimental to the public health, safety, and morals or welfare.
All those things must be true.
It's an or, but yeah, generally all of them must be true. And then here are the reasons. So it's not just that people are really cantankerous in that neighborhood. It has to be due to dilapidation, deterioration, age, obsolescence, inadequate provision, you can read that list. I don't have to read it for you. And the key at the bottom, or any combination of those factors. So if that helps you. And again, they must find that 2/3 of the buildings are of the character described and substantially contribute to blight. That is a blighted area. But now, remember that the Planning Commission also is going to look at the parcel level, because at a parcel level you can use eminent domain. Well, here's what I'm going to do. Eminent domain is authorized in these, but it's just for a specific parcel. Just take a look. I'm going to go back and forth between parcel and area. You see any difference? Any difference?
Eminent domain.
That's it. That's it. But all of the characteristics are the same for both an area or a parcel. But the reason they have to find that the parcel is blighted is because that's the only time you're allowed to use eminent domain. Now let's take a look at the. So I'll stop. Blighted area, blighted parcel. That's the highest level. We're going to go now to the second tier, which is a non-residential redevelopment area. And that is where the predominance of buildings are commercial. So you could have a separate area that you designate that's more commercial and not quite as blighted, where only half the buildings are blighted instead of 2/3. And that then the Planning Commission must find at least half of those. You've got it there.
What's predominantly non-residential? What's predominantly?
More than half.
More than half is predominant.
The predominance, yes.
Okay. So half of all the buildings in the area have to be non-residential.
Yes.
Then half of those non-residential have to be blighted. Gotcha.
And then again here, eminent domain may be used on blighted parcels only.
Very quickly about
Yes.
how does it come into play if the current owner of a property or an area has a redevelopment plan of their own that they are in the process of working through?
Meaning they are, right now, when you say redevelopment plan, do you mean like they're actually
Say
investing
somebody
funds and
owns,
changing something?
an old non-residential area and they have a plan to build XYZ there.
Oh, yes, a private plan to redevelop. Interesting. If we're worried about whether that's the one building that puts you over the top as far
Or
as.
do we even have the right to pull that area into our circle?
Yes, you do. Yes,
Because
you do. But
as it currently sits.
yes, but you've got to keep the 1/2. So if you pull that in and it changes this 1/2, that could be a problem. How would the Planning Commission characterize that parcel? Remember, this will be before, this will be public. So if I was that owner and I felt like I don't want to be in that blighted area, I don't want you to call my area blighted, I might show up to your meetings and the Planning Commission meetings and say, not blighted, leave me out of this area. And so you might have some questions for that owner about, well, you've been saying you got plans for the past 2.5 years and we haven't seen anything. Why don't you show us your finances? Why don't you show us that you have a loan from the bank to finish these? So you could
But
say,
it is a point that could be contested.
yes, it's going to be contested. And you'll want to know what the Planning Commission thinks about it. Because the Planning Commission, if they say, oh, that's not blighted, it's under construction, then that will change the way they view whether it's a non-residential redevelopment area.
And at some point in the future, you're going to tell us about our tools that we can use in public hearings? Are there
A little bit. When you say tools, like when you say the subpoena power and asking questions, I'll have a slide on it, but there's not a whole lot of detail here. But yes.
When you say here, do you mean in the statutes?
In the
or
statutes. Yeah, you got statutory power. Yes. Oh yeah. She's licking her chops. Now notice I put line out here to show you the difference between a blighted area, which is predominantly residential character, and a non-residential redevelopment area. You can see it gets rid of the ill health, transmission of disease, and says simply seriously adverse effects on surrounding development. And you can see it gets rid of some of the high density of population and adds things such as defective or inadequate street layout, faulty lot layout, tax delinquency exceeds fair value, or any combination of such factors. So a little bit easier to set a non-residential redevelopment area than it is to do a residential. Get the difference? Let's go to the third category, which is even easier. Although we have no case law to help us with this. Planning Commission must find a clear presentation, I just can't say it without smiling, that in the absence of municipal action, become in the reasonably foreseeable future a blighted area. And I don't have case law for you. I don't know. So it means, what that means for you is that it gives you some flexibility. Gives you some flexibility if you want to reach into some areas that you think are in danger of becoming blighted but aren't blighted just yet. You can get the Planning Commission to take a look at those and have, send a Tom Clancy novel to them at the same time so they can understand what clear and present danger is.
Wouldn't that be adjacent to a blighted area or another area? I mean, that's where you would want to use that. It's like, and we feel like this part is important to develop. You wouldn't just pick an area like this by itself.
Yeah, yes, you might. You might say, here's a high, let's say a corridor, where you say, you know what, everyone has to drive right through this neighborhood, and even though this is the blighted area, it's the area just outside that we also need to get at. So we're going to designate that. We recognize it's not blighted, but we're going to put time and energy into that area. So yes, you might. And you don't have to have contiguous areas. As a redevelopment commission, you can have multiple districts that you phase or what, and your area obviously has to be, each area you choose has to be contiguous or connected, but generally you can have multiple areas. You can say we want to get that area 2 blocks to the north where everyone has to drive in, and we think it's in clear and present danger of becoming blighted, and so we're going to ask the Planning Commission to certify it as a rehabilitation, conservation, and reconditioning. So you can look in that way. The details are probably in your 5 points transformation. Questions on that? These are good questions. You all really think about this. Again, eminent domain is ostensibly possible in the statute. It says that the determination has to be made building by building. But they don't assign anyone responsibility for making that determination, not even the Planning Commission. Every other statute says the Planning Commission must determine that the parcel is blighted. I imply from that the Planning Commission is going to be the one that has to determine whether there are blighted buildings, not parcels. So if you have a large parcel with 5 buildings on it, you're not allowed to say the whole parcel is blighted. You have to go in and say, oh, that building is blighted. This building is not.
That's
Y'all
only
get
for
that
eminent-
difference?
That's only for eminent domain.
It's only for eminent domain.
Okay.
And if you're not thinking about eminent domain, I won't waste any more time. Again, attorney fees will be paid by the Redevelopment Commission. So if somebody is subject to eminent domain under your power, attorney fees for them to negotiate with you on a fair price for their land will be paid by you. All right, this again, I'm reiterating this point. To procure from the Planning Commission the designation of areas and the Planning Commission's recommendation for redevelopment. No area shall be considered a redevelopment area unless it is determined by the Planning Commission. I'm just showing you the Planning Commission must do this. The Planning Commission certification shall be made in conformance with its comprehensive general plan. And the reason for this, it should make perfect common sense to you, right? If you choose an area for redevelopment and the Planning Commission has said we're turning that into a park, then it's within their power to say no, we're not going to certify that area because it's not in conformance with our plan to turn it into a park. So they are supposed to look at the big picture. You all are looking at your area, but they're looking at the whole picture and saying, yep, this area does deserve to be a blighted area, a non-residential redevelopment area, or a can't even remember the conditioning system.
Rehabilitation, conditioning, conservation.
There you go. That's it. Make it hard to say. All right. Questions on this? I think we've already hit that one 100 times. Now, in the past, redevelopment areas have been challenged, right? If I'm an owner and you're calling my parcel, you're including me in this blighted area, well, that might affect my property values, it might affect my business, I don't know, but I'm not happy about it. And so I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to sue the city for having declared my area blighted. And in that case, the court was like, look, There's no bad faith. They followed all the procedures. They didn't abuse their powers. So there's no basis for us as a court to undo this action. So, point is, don't have bad faith, follow the procedures, and your redevelopment area and plan will stay. And that's a key case. Now, this again, you shall prepare a redevelopment plan for any area. So once it's certified by the Planning Commission, you got to get to work, whether you completely agree with what they did or not. And so you must be putting together, this is Marcia's slide, the required elements of a plan. I'll pause just for a moment. We've already gone over. I'm not going to go into detail on these because we've already talked about it. That's why Marcia goes first. However, if any of this so far has just jogged a few questions for your thoughts, we'll stop here and let you ask questions. No? The question I have for you is, I think it's on the next slide. Oh yeah, here it is, estimated cost and method of financing. If you took that choice neighborhoods plan, does it contain all the necessary elements?
I would say.
I looked through it, I don't think it has my red circle.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it doesn't have.
it doesn't have the finance part.
Yeah, no, these.
But maybe it's there and I just missed
The
it.
president, the
Yeah, it
gateway
doesn't.
plan.
Sort of just saying we're gonna see this grant to pay for it.
It's a little bit.
I'm not sure
Funding
seeking a
sources.
grant is quite, seek a grant to pay for it is necessarily the same thing.
I agree.
But maybe.
But I have,
Maybe
I
put-
have.
Yeah, all I knew.
Yeah, that's
is-
what I was gonna say, and put it there, but they didn't put that in the
We didn't
plan.
put it in the plan.
But we have it, but we didn't put it, it's
Yeah.
not put in the plan.
Yeah, probably because it changes
Yeah.
with conditions.
Yeah, we didn't need
Right.
to do it.
This is what you need to know. You need to kind of look through that plan because it is, and the reason I say that is I've already heard discussion in just the past, couple hours about how that plan is already ready for you. It's something you can rely on, and so you need to kind of know what its strengths and weaknesses are and to what extent you agree with it. There's some great research that's been done in here, some helpful maps, and I'll put a couple of them up to give you an opportunity to have some initial discussions. But you need to be looking through and making sure that that plan has everything you need, and if it doesn't, you are going to need to ask for help.
Tyler, can we go back one slide?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Preliminary site plan, what is that?
How'd you all do? I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I mean, you do have examples of it
I
in
have, we have
CNI.
some, yeah.
Yep, but essentially, I think this becomes more relevant when you're focusing on a smaller
Specific.
area, in a specific
A
area.
specific plan.
But essentially, this will be this use here, this will be that use there.
For instance, the Days Hotel site is going to be a major focal point
Right.
of this commission. As part of our plan, knowing that it's going to be, are we required then to say, okay, this is going to be a 5-story multi-use complex and it's going to have 300 parking spaces and a tree every 10 spaces?
Let me play this out for you.
All right.
Okay, this is how this
I
works.
think it's already.
And for those of you who've not been on boards before, this is going to be an old hat for spring. This is how this works. You are going to put together a plan, and you may not completely agree on what your preliminary site plan is for the Days Inn parcel. And, is that right? Did I get that
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And so, let's say you make it a little bit wishy-washy. You say this is going to be commercial use here. We're not sure what. It's going to be commercial with a park next to it or something. Well, I'm an angry citizen, and I'm not thrilled. I'm not thrilled with this, and my property's right next to it, and so I want to know more. And so I'm going to pull out this statute. I'm going to read it just like you, Article 22, and I'm going to say, it says preliminary site plan. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to pull out 5 preliminary site plans. I'm going to put them on the table. I'm going to go,
Where's
here are
that?
preliminary site plans.
Yeah.
You said commercial area with a park next to it. Are these the same thing? And then you have a political problem, maybe a legal problem if I'm resourced and I say I'm going to sue you all for not having done a preliminary site plan, I'm going to try to say you've broken your procedures. So that's how this game works. Now, if everybody's in agreement that it really is just going to be a commercial space with a park next to it, then that's going to be just fine.
No problems.
No questions, no problems. So there's where the lawyer in me, you know, explains to you your risks if you don't provide that. I know what preliminary site plan means to me.
I was gonna say, what is it does say preliminary in the statute, and that means like a little bit high level subject to change. It doesn't define it beyond that.
Yeah.
And
So-
there's no case to interpret what preliminary means in this
Right.
context.
Well, there's the lawyer.
Very good, that's what I love.
This lawyer talk.
Right, because when we have this mushy language, that's why we have courts, is to go, is to decide, like, we don't know what this means.
What's the intent of the language?
Right.
So we want like a future land use plan and then some site-specific proposals.
Well,
it's
if you,
If there are sites identified.
yeah, right, like if
You might
you
not
said
say
days in, the days in parcel is really important to us, it's gonna be the cornerstone of our development, and it's important to your plan, but all it says is commercial area with a park next to it, then
Tyler, how do you ever get moving? I mean, you could have a year discussion on that one site, and then it really holds you up from everything. Why can't it just be a kind of a global plan of, yes, we like commercial development, we've zoned this, or we're asking for commercial development here because we think that's in the best interest of this corridor. And then maybe there's another area where it's housing and some retail or, you know, grocery store, whatever, and we think this is a mixed use, and we call it mixed use, but we're not specific that grocery store here, hairdresser here, houses there, but it's just mixed use. Can you not be vague in that sense?
I think you can be vague in that sense if you're waiting for the private sector to provide that development, and you say this is, so preliminary site plan to me means you're gonna be doing the development. So if you own the Days Inn site, and you plan to put a community center there, then maybe a preliminary site plan is appropriate, because you, as a city, or the redevelopment commission, is gonna do that development. But if the answer is, look, we don't have a preliminary site plan because we're not developing that site. We're going to sell it using our competitive bidding procedures and put requirements on it that it be at least, you know, this many square feet of commercial and this many square feet of residential. That might be all we see.
Plus, a preliminary site plan doesn't have to be complex. It can just be a little box on the parcel with some basic landscaping details. If it's not gone through the approval process, it doesn't even necessarily have to conform to the existing code. It's preliminary.
Yeah, but we don't, at the statute level, there is no criteria for preliminary site plan.
Yeah, I'm just saying we don't have to get caught up on it, because you can draw that in 10 minutes and say this is our preliminary plan.
You're suggesting that if I'm the angry citizen who wants to hang my hat on this, and I go and I ask you, give me 5 preliminary site plans, you'll pull out 5 that look like just boxes.
Yeah, this is the space that'll occupy us, and I can show other site plans that look like that go through our site plan approval process, and that's what it looks like on paper. But it doesn't necessarily, but the devil's in the details for those. We don't have to get caught up in the details at a preliminary stage.
So there you go. Clear as mud.
I feel very clear.
Yeah, good. Then you're very clear on it. We'll call you to testify. Okay. Good. Any other? That was an excellent question. That's exactly the kind of question you should be asking at this stage. Anything else? And it's great having staff here who can say, here's what preliminary site plan means in Newbern.
Another question, number 9, plan for relocation of families that will be displaced. Is there any authority about what that plan should consist of?
So there's no more further there's no further definition in here. I guess I could look to see if I glossed over that. But I will say this: there is an entire chapter on relocation assistance that's separate from all this. That is a power that the city possesses for anyone who is displaced by the activities of a government.
Does that power extend to this commission?
Well, if you're funded for it, so it sounds like you have to have a plan.
Right.
You have to have a plan, like where will they live? If your idea is, here are 20 houses and they're all needing to be demolished and replaced, but people are living there right now, your plan might be, those folks are going to be provided relocation assistance, and they're going to live in these houses that have been set aside for them somewhere else or something like that. Or there's apartments, there's vacancy, and we're going to help them to find places to stay. So that is a plan. That's not a funded, where you have to have the money sitting there. It's your plan.
But the plan in number 9 is, do we have to have an estimated cost related to number 7 for that
Yeah.
plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll say in Kinston, they avoided this by only focusing on vacant houses. So there was no plan that was required. They said, we're only gonna deal with vacant property. I think that for some of the redevelopment projects proposed in CNI, because it was Housing Authority affiliated, they are also required to have that plan for relocation. So I'm gonna guess for some of these
Oh,
projects,
absolutely.
you've got that already in there.
Well, that'd
But
be
if you
great.
wanna look beyond the public housing, which it sounds like you do, you're gonna need to think about that and dealing with occupied properties. In Kinston, they just said, we're only touching vacant housing, that's it.
Remember too, this plan is for displaced through redevelopment activities. Actually, it says a statement of a feasible method proposed for the relocation of the families displaced. And what's interesting about that is, well, displaced by what?
Yeah.
Displaced by the
Private
commit, right? I mean, if the redevelopment commission comes in and has this great plan for the Days Inn parcel, and it causes property, a landlord to say, you know what, I am cashing in now. I'm gonna, the developers come by and is offered $200,000 for my place, and that family is now displaced. I'm not sure. That's not the redevelopment commission that did that. That's the market. That's the private market that did that. So you might have a plan. You might say it's important to us to take care of the residents of this neighborhood, but that's not necessarily, I don't think, a required element to figure out, like, if the market gets hot, what you're going to do with those folks.
It's not required, but is it permissible?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's gentrification.
Absolutely. Great questions. More? This is why we're here. Okay, it's 12:05, so we were going to go till 12:35 or so we're doing okay. All right, now, after you've made your plan, you have to submit it back to the planning commission. Because remember, the planning commission, this should make sense, the planning commission is looking at the whole big picture for the city, and you're just looking at your little redevelopment area. So they're going to be checking it, and they're going to say, they're going to make a recommendation to approve, reject, or modify, but it's just a recommendation, it's not binding on the governing board. And if they take longer than 45 days, you go ahead and submit it to the governing board without getting their recommendation. And you have the planning commission's right. You submit this planning commission's recommendation. You recite all these things. Yes, this promotes health, safety, general welfare, efficiency, economy, and all that great stuff. Governing board holds a notice public hearing. Plan must be available for public inspection for 10 days before. And then the governing board approves, rejects, or modifies the plan. At that point, they can do whatever they want.
Okay, dumb question. But in your first
No
bullet
such
point, when we submit our plan to the board, assuming we pass the planning commission, does that submission have to be in writing?
Yes.
Imagine it would be.
Yes.
Does it require, or have you seen it in other areas where in addition to submitting the plan in writing, that there's some type of argument or formal presentation during the board meeting?
Like you mean verbally?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely can be. It does not have to be. I mean, this is truly the
We would
Board
not
of
adopt
Aldermen
it
can
without, we
always-
would not adopt it without a public presentation, just
Yeah.
for the sense of transparency and
Right.
putting it out there. Because I think it calls for a public hearing.
it does.
Yeah, so the public has to weigh
Just
in
one.
on it, therefore it
Just
should be
one.
a presentation.
Is there any breach of fiduciary duty if the plan is also released to the public before the public hearing?
Well, it has to be for 10 days. It has to be available. So it should be released to the public for at least 10 days prior to that public hearing. The idea is for this to be transparent. I mean, that's one of the, we might have time for this, I might skip over, but one of the advantages, and actually Sabrina mentioned this at the very beginning, is that you all are going to show that transparency and you get to take it a little bit out of the political context, where you aren't elected officials, you're here just trying to do the right thing. Elected officials do too, but they answer to constituents. And so it's just a little bit different, and you get to provide this. But now that transparency means that the public gets an opportunity to review your work and comment on
Who releases it, the board or us? To the public?
it. The final,
Board of Aldermen, what we would do is, we would get
That's a great
that, and so what would happen is it would come before us, and we would have to be, under our consent agenda,
Yeah, we would.
call for a public
Call for
hearing,
it.
so the
Yeah.
document would be attached to our agenda, and we would publicly say we are calling for a public hearing at our next meeting, which would be 2 weeks later, and therefore it's out in the public for 2 weeks there, and it's also attached to our agenda at the following meeting for people to review as well.
Okay.
Would there be a problem with us going public with it even before then?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Yep.
Well, there'd be no reason, really shouldn't.
I mean, it just depends on how long. I mean,
Yeah.
you could imagine a scenario. I mean, this is not a great scenario, but where you release your redevelopment plan. So you're going to submit it formally, right, with a cover letter saying we think this is good. We've made these findings. We voted as a commission. We're sending it now to you, governing board. Governing board receives it, and now they have to have their process where they're going to receive it. Probably, it sounds like, at a public meeting, and then say we will hold a public hearing next time, and you could perhaps things blow up. Folks start reading the plan and they go, "Oh my gosh, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen," and they start lobbying the governing board and say, "Please don't adopt this plan." And so the governing board might come back and say, "We need more than just 2 weeks. We're gonna actually continue this until the next meeting that we have," and so giving more time. So there's no requirement that it be 10 days later. It could be longer, but the point is, if this is moving, if you've all have done your job and folks can read it and they say, "Yep, this is the right thing," and the governing board has already probably said, "We really support this plan," then you'd imagine it would happen shortly after your 10 days are up.
But Tyler, so after they approve it, it goes to the planning board, so that same plan, so that's a public process where it's out in the public, it's reviewed, they have a public hearing at the plan, and that same plan then comes to us. So really, it's out there for a longer period of time because the same plan is going to 2 different places, if I understand that correctly. So
Yeah.
you're looking at it in a lot of different places, but it's the same plan, so you have a lot of eyes that are available to
Yeah,
look at it.
there's no mandate for the planning commission to hold a public hearing. However, you're right.
It's
They're
a
going to
public
discuss it
process,
at a
yeah.
public meeting.
Right.
And so it's going
And
to be
their
right
agenda
there.
is public, and so it's all out
Absolutely.
there.
Yep, it'll be an attachment to your agenda. Absolutely.
In the spirit of transparency, respectfully speaking, I mean, most of the people that live in the neighborhoods that we're talking about don't often participate in those types of processes. So is there any prohibition against us specifically targeting people in the neighborhood publishing our plan to them?
No, there's nothing that
You
prohibits
would
that.
encourage them to.
Yeah, I bet your governing board would be grateful for you too, Mark. 'Cause I know that when DFI does this kind of work, we recommend to the governing board that we go into the neighborhoods that are most affected and give them an opportunity to come and talk about it and be heard.
I would hope you'd hold a meeting,
Absolutely.
you know, in the areas and invite the public to come in and comment on it before you submit it to us, or before you submit it to the planning board, so that you've had a chance for them to comment on it, pros and cons that you may want to tweak because you've heard from the citizens. And then another layer would be the citizens here, you know, speaking to us as well. I want as many public processes. But to that point, I don't want it to be bogged down, because every time we do one, somebody says, "Well, you didn't, you know, when we did this process," they said, "Oh, you didn't, you know, you didn't ask the citizens." Teresa would say that. We had almost 500 people participate, yet there were people in the community who said, "Well, we didn't know anything about it." But yet, you know, we see that we did. So then we have another layer and another layer. At some point, you say, "Look, we feel confident we've put it out there," and you have to choose to participate.
You're not responsible for putting it in front of those that have their head in the hole in the ground, but anybody paying attention, you'd have.
You just want to make sure you are giving the citizens opportunity to speak to any point of it in any way, shape, or form. Whether you're going and sitting on their porch discussing it with them, or they come to a meeting. And that's where it'll be up to you all to figure out you know, and that's the reason we have you as residents, and Robbie, you know, you're a voice in that community. So I would look to you to take that into the community and say, hey, this is what I know. I want to explain it to you. Tell me what you think. And you can get that reaction back from them that you can bring back to the committee. Same thing with you, Jabari. You've got family and people in there, and I think it's important to understand that. So the people most impacted by this plan have the biggest voice in it.
We plan on doing some using unorthodox avenues to do this above and beyond the residence council. So that's why we're asking these questions. Make sure we're not going to, if we go out there.
You're going to get it anyway, I promise you.
Let's make sure we're together up here, though. I mean, we're going to get it there, but we can handle that. So.
We just need to know we have the statutory authority. to do
Right.
things.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
You asked about later modifying the plan. Yes, that can be done. If you have, after you, again, the idea of this transparent redevelopment plan is to let everybody who owns property there know the government's coming in and it's going to be doing some stuff. And so once that's happened, you know, folks are going to start selling property, buying property based on your public plan that's out there. Once folks start selling property after approval of the plan, you actually have to go get their consent. Now, it's typically if it's involved you, but you have to get their consent if they're affected by the modification. If you said, oh, all this land right here is going to be right next to a park, and then you change it, it's going to be, nope, now it's going to be next to a chicken manufacturing facility. That will change that, and so you'd have to get approval from the redevelopers who have purchased land in that area. So just be aware.
That's why you said about the tweaking the plan, you'd have to go through, that's what you.
It's not so easy. It's not something you're going to want to do necessarily. Now, if it's really early and you go, oh my gosh, we just forgot to just add this one thing, maybe that's not a big deal. And if there's a proposed modification will substantially change, again, no definition, substantially change the plan, then you have to go through this approval process again. Submit it to the governing board, have the public hearing, 10 days, all those approval processes.
So we only have to get consent if people start selling their property. If there's no sale of real estate, then we don't have to get anybody's consent.
You just have to realize there are consequences once you approve this plan.
If it's changed.
Has the sale and the purchase of property over in that area been lifted?
No, we have a freeze on properties within what we've called the CNI area, so according to this. And so that freeze is still on
And
right
how
now
long is it going to be in effect?
Well, that's really,
It's in the redevelopment commission's hands, right? That
right.
was your
That's in our hands.
Yes, correct,
For us to be able to lift it when we see fit.
correct,
for
for right now,
whatever
yeah.
stipulations or
And we did that on purpose to give you all a basis of properties to use, and we just didn't want to sell it out on the open market, because right now what would happen is all somebody would have to do is come to the Board of Aldermen and say, I offer X amount of dollars for this property, and then that would start the upset bid process, and we would have to sell it.
And we know
Well,
who would be the
we'd have
best.
to-
You could reject all.
We could reject it, but we have not been rejecting anything, and so I closed that down so that it could be more controlled by
And
the
we all know
city.
who the main players would be.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Well,
you
some
wanna-
of us know.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So anyway, that's
great.
where we're at with that.
Now, again, I've said this, but we're repeating it again. Once the governing body approves it, that is when you are authorized to acquire property and execute contracts for clearance. You can see that. Your powers don't start until the governing board approves your plan. You can, if during the plan you realize there are some critical pieces of property that need to be acquired right now, you can do that. The redevelopment commission can, also the city can do that. They can acquire property. But you'd have to ask the governing board's approval if you want to acquire property right now while you're still doing the plan. Does that make sense? Because again, they don't want you doing anything when there's no redevelopment plan that's been approved.
I've got a question for Marcia. When you were in Kinston, you all only took the houses or the properties that were vacant, and you worked on those first. After you did a pass and replace and had those occupied, then did you go into other places where the persons had been displaced, put those into those residences that were now available, and then work on those, or did you just continuously work on vacant properties?
Great question. So it was actually a private investor or investors that did most of the redevelopment in that area. What the city did was facilitate redevelopment when possible. So when there were heirs properties or cases where tax foreclosure needed to happen or other foreclosure of liens, because no private sale could be negotiated, that's when the city intervened to facilitate it. So it was less being the City or Redevelopment Commission being an active participant in the redevelopment, but being the connector to pass properties on to the private sector. But the focus of that facilitation was only for vacant properties. So didn't essentially deal with displacing existing residents. I'll say with the private investor and the investors that were interested in the neighborhood, we did, through the community engagement process, establish goals that we wanted to keep long-term renters in the neighborhood, and that we recognized that there were people that had been there a long time, even if they weren't homeowners, that deserved to stay and deserved better quality housing. So the private investors felt the pressure because they were part of that community engagement process too. They were at those meetings, and they knew that that was a goal and that the city would work with them more favorably if they did that. So they took it upon themselves actually to be those good actors and get people out of substandard housing into more quality housing.
So it's through Jeff's office that we would be able to identify those long-term renters that have been parts of the community for quite a while, and also be able to identify those properties that are heir properties and some of the more difficult properties.
Yep. I don't know if you would have a measure of long-term renters. That might be hard to tell. That was something we learned through door-to-door engagement.
Yeah, I mean, Landon knows.
Yeah, you might know. Yeah, who are the long-term renters. Right. But yeah, you can figure out which are renter-occupied properties. The tenure, that's something you're going to have to.
I'm sure we have long-term, I don't know, yeah. We have a lot of renters that bounce around a lot
Within that neighborhood.
within the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm more familiar with.
Mhm.
But we can.
Yeah, but there are some that have been there for over 30 years.
Yeah.
That have never owned, but they're still renting, but
Yeah.
they've been in that same dwelling.
Yeah, I'm
And
sure
probably
there's some
bought
like
it,
that.
they purchased it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
Probably.
Something I'll add too, I thought
Yeah,
that we did was unusual in Kinston was looking at homeownership too. We didn't want to just look at blighted or distressed properties. We wanted to recognize those homeowners that were trying their best given the resources they had. So we actually had different measures in our field service for the property, the physical condition of the property, but also what we called kind of just maintenance. So even if somebody's roof was falling in and their porch was falling in, but they mowed the lawn and they were planting flowers, I mean, it was a subjective criteria, but we wanted to make sure to acknowledge who are those homeowners that even if they have limited financial resources are trying their best to do with what they have. We wanted to acknowledge those and figure out ways to link them to resources too. So that might be something to consider.
Could you possibly share with me, could you possibly share with me in Kinston where you had single-family homes? Did they remain single-family homes, or did you bring in multi-dwelling homes? Or do you have any kind of stats on that?
They largely remain the same. A lot of single-family homes in this area had already been converted into multi-families, those big Victorian houses, right, that are chopped up into apartments. But for the most part, they stayed the same. If they were single-family, they stayed single-family. If they were multifamily, they stayed multifamily. The reason being the rents are so low in this area that the rehabilitation costs are enough. Converting them into different types of units, or to break a single family into a duplex, or to turn a old house that's in 4 apartments back into a single family is cost prohibitive. Now in the future that could change in this neighborhood, but for now, based on the financial feasibility analysis, it's not
Just
there.
trying to make sure that you didn't take 5 consecutive lots and throw 50 units in there.
Well, that's something, I'm pointing at the screen, but the elements of the plan, remember the population densities, intensities, people densities, that's where you provide that guidance. So we said this is what the zoning's going to be, this is what the UDO is going to say in terms of how many people,
UDO.
what the UDO, yep.
Define.
Oh, UDO, sorry, the Unified Development Ordinance, so the regulations that really dig in behind that zoning and what types of uses and how many dwellings can be in one property, or how many, all those rules. So you're going to define that up front. And if you hear from people, we want to keep the character of single family homes, and that's something that's important. And we want to not have huge multifamily developments, and that's something
Right.
you're gonna put in that redevelopment plan. So those are
Like
all
on-
questions you should answer.
Like on Third Avenue is what remember that? They had the little thing in the front that was big, that
Right.
big old giant.
So what that was, is it the 108 loan?
Third Avenue? No, that's a
But the
tax.
towers
No,
are being
I thought you
relocated.
meant when they bought up all the houses, they
Yeah.
bought up all the
That
houses
whole
there.
road, and then
That
they're
was the
putting that.
CDBG.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
CDBG loan,
Project.
project, and they bought all the houses, widened the street so that they
Right.
could, and it, put a sidewalk, it makes it look more presentable.
Right.
And then the gentleman owned the property behind that and asked for access to his property from Third Avenue to build those low-income tax credit projects.
Okay.
And, that's the possibility in other parts, is to look at some of the streets, and it could be buying up several houses to widen the street, to put sidewalks in there to make it a more walkable neighborhood. You may decide, well, this would be good for the neighborhood.
Okay.
We have some streets that have 3-4 houses left on.
Right.
So who actually owns the property? Now, what building is that on Third Avenue? What is it gonna be?
It's old.
Senior
Senior
citizen.
citizen, low
Assisted
income,
living.
not assisted, but
No.
low income
55
housing.
and older.
Is that where the towers are being relocated? The
No,
citizens of the tower?
no, not at
Is that
all.
a perception of reality then?
Yeah,
That's
not
what
at
we
all,
need.
not at all.
All
This is
right.
all new housing.
And who owns the property from that property line up to Broad Street?
Well,
What, are you talking about on the Third Avenue side?
On the Third Avenue side, on
Okay,
the side that building is on, from the end of the property line of that building, who owns it from there to the street?
But he owns that whole
He owns
piece
that
front to
whole
back.
sliver.
well,
Get it all the way to Third Street.
from
Not to Third, I'm talking to Broad. Didn't you say
If
to
I
Broad?
may,
To Broad.
if I may, get us, if I may, these are good questions.
Oh, by all means.
These-
I'm all about you. We
These,
got
these
it.
are, I don't want to, I mean, if you want to continue this discussion for.
We'll do it
I
all.
just-
We got
I
you.
just-
We'll do it all.
I just want to make sure I use your time as
Yeah.
as well
And
as
we'll
possible.
give you maps. We can give you maps with all, who owns what properties, and then you can look at the delineations.
I know how to find YouTube. I'm sorry, you
Yes.
go right ahead.
I'm hard to find, well, I'm a slippery person. I
You
would
don't
just-
create a clear and present day.
I would just note, something to just bring out this discussion is that we all have different options, right? It's, in Kinston, the city could have, or the redevelopment commission could have purchased 10 houses. And the city or the redevelopment commission could have taken its money and built those houses, improved those houses, but they chose not to do it that way. They chose instead to turn those structures over to the private sector and said, here are the rules. As long as you follow those rules, private sector, you can come in and improve those houses. And so you get to decide, how you're going to approach that. In some cases, it may be that you want to take a whole line of houses and turn it into something different. You might need to use city resources. In other cases, you may say, this neighborhood's just fine. It just needs to make sure it stays single family and we don't change it. And so we'll go ahead, the ones that we acquire through tax foreclosure or whatnot, those should be sold to the private sector and just redeveloped in accordance with our plan. And so we don't have to put our money toward it. We're just setting the table to make sure that it happens the way we want it to. So you're going to have options.
But that delineation has got to be done as a part of the initial plan
When you say that delineation,
of what we're going to keep and try to develop ourselves.
yeah, what you're going to do yourself, you're going to need a financial plan for. The rest, I don't think you do. I think the rest, if you say, we're not going to be investing our own resources here, we're going to set these zoning requirements, and we're going to do code enforcement, and we're going to do all this other stuff. But we're not going to invest any resources into those single-family homes. They just need to stay like they are, and the market will take care of it. And we'll sell the property that we do obtain.
Can we get a copy of Kenton's plan? I think
It's
that might
in
be
your
helpful.
folder too. But
Oh, it is? Oh, okay. Then that was a
There's
great
so much stuff
illustration
in the
of the
folder.
possible options that we have. That's why I asked that question. So,
No, it's
not.
not. These questions, actually, I got to be honest with you, these are excellent
Really
questions.
sophisticated
So,
questions.
And to help us going forward, because we now have that educational baseline of the processes needed to move forward. That's why we ask those questions of the existing.
yeah, I already
projects.
see
Okay.
your capacity increasing as we go.
Okay.
This is good.
Yeah, Jeff warned us that y'all are a really smart group.
A little more than you're used to dealing with me for the past 3 years.
Now, so I am getting close to the end of the time, but this is a really important thing. You've already started getting into it. That's why letting that discussion go is perfectly fine. because you're getting at these questions, but I want to give you a framework. Sometimes it helps to have common language when you're talking about what is our plan here? Why do you think it's going to work to buy this property here? And I want you to know how community developers, very quickly, how they approach these kinds of problems. So I'm going to give you two. One is the land banking approach, and the second is the private real estate development approach. Remember I told you at the beginning I was going to do that? So let's first start with the land banking. It involves some discussion. If you are tasked with redeveloping, and you've already got ideas in your head about what you think you want to do, you may have read the C&I plan. What powers do you need? I want to make sure. What do you need? What powers do you need to do what you want to do? What do you think?
The power to buy and sell, right?
The power to buy property and sell property. That is one, yes. Others?
Dictate zoning.
Power to dictate zoning, sure. And you have that, so sure. Set the table. Make sure the conditions are set. Yep. Any others?
We gotta cause it to be built, right?
Yeah, you have to have the power to actually, if you're going to do it, you have to be able to improve it. So buying and selling is one thing, but what if you need to raise the building first? What if you need to repair the building first? You need that power to contract in order to do those things, to demolish or to construct or improve.
The power to enforce existing restrictive covenants or zoning.
The power to enforce restricted. Yeah, I think you probably do need that power. I'm not sure you have that power.
Or to effectuate that.
Yeah. Or maybe your power is going to be limited to having, subpoenaing someone and calling them in and saying, why haven't you followed these rules? Or submitting to the city, the planning department, there are some folks that aren't following the rules we set. Please go cite them for notice of violations because they're not following zoning rules. So it might not be, but that's a good point. That's going back to zoning. There are some powers the city retains, but you all are developers. This is a redevelopment commission.
So if you required somebody as part of the sale process we saw earlier, that you, within 5 years, have to build and do something, and they do not do that, does the commission have the power to take that property away from them or to sue them or whatever it takes because they did not act in accordance with that?
Yes.
Or does that go to a higher power?
Yeah, the redevelopment commission can make it so they do. So when you sell property, you're allowed to say, we're selling you this property on the promise that you will, within 5 years, is awfully generous. I would make it much shorter.
Year.
Yeah, you start in a year, finish in 2.
Yeah.
If you don't, then we're going to have a reverter clause in the deed that brings that property right back to us, and we'll pay you back for whatever you paid for the property. But we want it back, and we want to go find a more responsible owner. You give yourself that ability in the deed, and you might give the city that ability too. I imagine you'd want to give both parties that in case you don't have enough money, and you need the city with its resources to come in and be the one to take that property back and put it back in your hands.
Absolutely. Even private developers do that.
Yeah, I understood, but I just wanted to say it out loud that you would have that.
So, yeah, so the one that you all didn't talk about was, provide financial assistance to those who are first movers, it's going to be hard for them. If you choose your redevelopment area in a really hard area, private sector might not be terribly interested unless you sweeten the pot in some way, because they go to the bank and they say, bank, I need a loan. I'm going to redevelop these 3 houses right here in this distressed area. The bank's going to go, I'm giving you a loan for that. Unless you show me there's some great plan that's going to make sure that really tough area is going to be better, I'm not giving you a loan for that. And so then maybe that redeveloper comes to you and says, I can't get a loan from the bank. I'm perfectly willing to put my equity of $10,000 per house or whatever it is, but I need a loan, and you all are the only bank in town. So you can provide that financial assistance if necessary. And that is often something that for land banking, when community developers think about how we go into distressed areas, we realize that the normal financial institutions aren't going to work. And so sometimes we have to do it.
Can the commission offer abatement, tax abatement, or is that only the Board of Aldermen?
Yeah, actually it's a constitutional issue. The Constitution says that the General Assembly is the only entity that's allowed to offer any abatements, and they have to do so statewide. And so there aren't any abatements that relate to redevelopment areas. They could, the General Assembly could enact one and say,
So we couldn't say as a city, we have a tax incentive, or, you know, we'll abate the tax incentive?
If we land banked it though, then there wouldn't be any taxes, right? If it's owned by the redevelopment
right,
commission,
if
and a
you,
land bank,
right,
then we get to set the table. We don't pay taxes.
right, you don't set the taxes, and that's if you, well, that, you're thinking of a land trust, perhaps.
I am thinking of
Which
that.
is where the
But
city
that's-
owns the land, and because it's, land is expensive, the city keeps hold of land and says to a developer, I'll let you build on our land, but we still own it, and we want to make sure it's used for affordable housing for low-income people. And so part of the way that we make it cheap, make it possible for it to be rented to low-income folks at the low rents they need, is that we, the city, will own the land and not put that cost on you, private developer. So you do a lease to us for the land, we'll build some property on, build some buildings on it, and you can lease them as long as you promise to lease them to people who make 60% of the area median income or less. You might put those restrictions on it, and then when you know, and your property, you may keep it for as long as you have a ground lease with us. So that is where you have control over that property. Does that?
We have a parcel like that, Craven Terrace, privately owned now. They do the same thing there. The dirt is leased by the housing authority to, it's not a trust, but to the developer, and they don't pay the tax on it, they pay a portion, I think.
Have you seen trust used in, I mean, I've seen trust used in areas of where affordability is the issue, right? To keep houses, to keep the cost down. Have you seen trust used in redevelopment areas, like in blighted areas?
Not in North Carolina.
Yeah.
In hot markets, yes.
Yeah, it's easy there.
I'm not sure that you need that in this market. Frankly, the
It's
problem
not-
here is going to be,
It's not.
what are your rents that you can charge?
Yeah.
And is that enough to get a private developer to go, yeah, I could construct a
Yeah.
house and I could sell it for that much.
$300 a year in taxes. Is
Yeah, that's going to be your challenge
Yeah.
that I think you'll face. Okay. Code enforcement, I'm going to have to skip. But your city has a lot of ability to do code enforcement. Code enforcement is actually the first part of land banking, where you go in and you say, private sector, you ought to be keeping your houses up. The city and the redevelopment commission aren't going to do anything at first. We're just going to tell you to maintain your houses as you're supposed to based on our existing minimum housing code or whatever code enforcement mechanisms you already have available. And those are pretty powerful, right? To go in and say, I'm going to inspect your property, and I found these problems with it, and our minimum housing code says you can't have a leaking roof, and you can't have a hole in the floor, and you've got to have working power, and the septic has to actually be operational. And if you don't fix those things in 60 days, we're gonna come in, and we're gonna fix it for you. And then we're gonna put the charge of that onto your property, and it's a lien. And then if you don't pay us back within a certain amount of time, we're gonna foreclose on your property, and then we're gonna get it. And we're gonna turn it over to an owner who's more responsible. That has nothing to do with redevelopment. That's just code enforcement, which you already have, but that is expensive. I don't want to fool you into thinking I said it just like that. But that is a process, and that is expensive. But you can invest in that. The city, as your partner, can say, yeah, code enforcement, we need to do that right off the bat. But I don't, you do have the power to conduct examinations and investigations. There it is.
Can we, oh, okay, here, that's.
Hear testimony under oath, issue subpoenas, requiring them to attend and produce books and papers.
Can we single out renters, rental housing versus owner occupied as far as different standards at all?
Oh, wait, it depends on what you mean.
Yeah, I know.
What you can do, no, you can't change your standards based on whether they're owner occupied or rental. However,
But-
who you choose to inspect
Yeah.
might be.
Well, you know, the building code is very loose, right? So we talk about people that don't have electricity. That's perfectly legal in North Carolina, right?
It doesn't have to be a heating source.
Correct. Is there any way to, can we say, well, in this area, I'm using it as a poor example, but everybody needs to have electricity?
Yes. You have the ability within a redevelopment area to say, we're making compulsory requirements for.
We just have to treat everyone the same, but we can treat them to a different standard than we would outside the.
Yes. That's the key. This is one of your special powers.
Okay.
Is instead of having to make it citywide, you get to make it just redevelopment area-wide.
Interesting.
That they can choose to prioritize doing inspections of renter properties.
Right,
renter
that could be
occupied.
that could be the priority first. But you'd want to make, remember, do not abuse your discretion, do not have bad faith, follow your procedures.
just
So you
describe
might
night
say,
every day.
I'd recommend making a finding that the commission believes that properties are a key factor in the redevelopment of this area, and so we're going to prioritize inspections first, or we recommend to the city that they prioritize inspections of rental properties first, homeowners second. You might use something like what Marcia was saying, of those who are maintaining their properties, they don't get inspected. There could be ways.
One of the issues I found, though, as I was in the community and talking to people there that live in what I think below minimum standards for housing, they don't want anybody to do anything because they have nowhere to go. And if we do something about it, then where do they go? So I don't know, it's the chicken and the egg. Do we try to build some housing stock and put something there for the people to go to and then come to them and say, look, this is a minimum standard, and how I got to this place was somebody was complaining about their electric bill being, the rent was $300, the electric bill was $600. So I went to go and look at it, and oh my God, the wiring was dangerous as far as I was concerned. I mean, no insulation, there was multiple problems, and I said, hey, I'm getting an inspector here tomorrow, this is ridiculous. And the lady, started crying and said, please don't, I have nowhere to go. This is all that I have and all I can afford. So that's concerning to me that as we build that, or we decide to do something like that, again, chicken and egg, what's going to come first? Are we going to focus and say, we're going to build affordable housing in this area and then go after the rental part of it so that we can get rid of some of these, minimum standard or below minimum standard housing, but have a place for people to go to, because that's...
And we can set the standard.
Yeah, you can set the standard, but if you can't enact it, if you can't enforce that standard, because you're basically driving people out of their homes by doing that, because they have nowhere to go. So that's...
Well, that's where weatherization,
That's exactly
weatherization
right.
can be
Now,
helpful, where you're not, you just say, we're going to come repair.
Can we
You're a
use
low-income
our-
person, we're going to
We
repair.
can't
The
use our
landlords.
CDBG funds for non-owner occupied structures. Could we have a fund that our Board of Aldermen gives us, because they're so awesome, to fix, to weatherize rental properties?
Okay.
Well,
So you're giving a gift to the
Well,
owner.
yeah, that's what I'm about to say, though.
Gotcha.
Rental, like you said, the steps where we prioritize rental and homeowners and this and that. The rental is a for-profit deal. They should be having it at code anyway. That's the problem over
Yes.
there in the first place.
It is.
And some of your renters do not understand, or don't have the educational background to be able to even voice it or fight that it's not there. They're just going along because they have a rule over
But
there.
once you go after the landlord,
Right. Yeah, they
and
might
you
try
tell
to boot
him,
them out. Yeah, I
that's
see
it, they're
what
going to
you're
put them
saying.
out, you're going to
Booted
shut
out.
them down, and we're going to say, look, you are at below minimum standard, we can't have this, your place is unsafe. And they say, okay, sure, and they throw the person out. The only thing that might
Where does
motivate
it
them is
stop,
they lose the
Sabrina?
rent. They lose the rent, so
But where does it stop?
I don't-
I
that's-
mean, right now we're perpetuating this.
I agree. That's why you
That's-
all are
that's
here.
right.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
I was about to say,
it's a thorny problem that exists all
All
over
over
the
the
nation.
country. All over
but at
the
least we're
country.
doing something about it. So
Yeah.
let's do something about it. I mean,
It's
it's
more public shaming versus more.
But yeah, you cannot give a gift to the local landowner,
I've been
but
dealing with this.
you can give them a loan. You could say, you know what, we're going to come by here quite frequently, but we do have a loan for you
Okay,
that would allow you to
gotcha.
fix this place up. And if you don't, we're really going to become a,
But my point is, we
A
can
nuisance.
create a program where non-owner occupied single-family residential can be fixed.
yes.
Yeah.
You can
Okay,
create a
that was-
program
that was
following
my-
constitutional rules, of course, but yes.
We can.
You could, if they're a low-income owner, then
Yeah.
you'd be able to help them.
Yeah, see, I can't do that now.
But that was
Yeah,
getting
now.
back to what I was saying, that a lot of these non-owners do not live in the area, and they are renting. And as we went and saw, if we do have the inspector come out, then the first thing that they're gonna do, they're gonna shut it down. And like I said, they're gonna be displaced,
Correct.
and we don't have anywhere to put them.
but
Can I
as
ask
we
you-
go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question about going back to the last slide, about the code enforcement?
Yes,
Are there, and not abusing our discretion and whatnot,
right?
when would we exercise our power to conduct examinations and investigations, would that be before we submit our plan to the board?
I think you're at any point allowed to exercise that power.
Okay, you
So-
made a comment about making findings. Would we need to do that just during our regular meetings, or how, what does that look like?
You may not need to use that power because you've got a very cooperative city staff. I think it was made for the time when the city staff says, I'm not coming in, I'm not talking, I don't have any time for you people at the redevelopment commission. That's not the case here. So the fact of the matter is, if you say, I need to know how many renters are in this neighborhood, Jeff's gonna go, okay, let me see if I can find that out. That's really, I think, what you're gonna be used, why that power is there. Do I really think you're gonna need it? No. I don't. We are now over time, and I'm okay, but I want to be respectful of your time. If you all need to go, you go. But I keep going just a little bit longer till I get to the point where I can't stay because I gotta get my car back.
Can I take that last type of scenario a little bit further? So say that we do have somewhere where we can put that displaced family, that we put the pressure on the landlord, and he says, well, I'm not gonna fix it, and you know what? The city of New Bern shuts him down for code violations, being under
Minimum code.
living conditions. The family is displaced, they're out. Then what kind of hold do we have on the landlord, and what kind of time frame do we have over him now? Can we as a board, as a commission, put some kind of stipulations on him to give him anything, a certain amount of time to bring it up to code?
If the
Or is it already something in place that we have
Yeah,
to
we
follow?
have a very active, as you've seen, we have torn down many dilapidated houses in the area. We have a minimum housing officer. There's a minimum housing code in the state building code, and we follow that. So if the structure doesn't meet that minimum code, we go through and say you need to fix A, B, C, and D, and we have a hearing, formal hearing, and out of that comes everything that needs to be fixed and the amount of time that it'll take to fix, and we say, okay, there you go, and we give it to the owner.
So we have to follow those guidelines, we don't set our own time frame.
Unless you want to set your own.
Yeah, and then you'd have
Do
to
we have to
set
follow
your
to
own.
enforce that?
You do, but the time, I mean, it's hard even for a dedicated staffer to follow all these. I think what you're gonna do is you're gonna be asking the city to prioritize this
And
area.
so it's best for us to go ahead and follow what's already in place.
I believe so. I think that's what makes sense.
Yeah.
You're gonna try to get that to be a priority for the inspection.
I mean, it can come down to screens. I mean, windows have to have screens, right? So I mean, that's even a minimum housing code issue. Now, it's easy to fix, but it gets you into the process.
Well, what's harder is it's one thing to demolish, it's a little bit harder to do the repairs. So where the owner
Correct.
says, I don't have any money to repair, I'm sorry, I'm just
Yeah,
not
those
willing
end up
to.
being tear downs right now.
And then, yeah, it's easier to do tear downs because you say, all right, everybody out, we're gonna tear it down. It takes one day to tear it down, but a repair where you say, all right, we're gonna try to fix the electrical wiring here.
And we don't want to be tearing things down anymore, really.
You wanna preserve it, but if the owner's uncooperative, it can be hard to make that happen. But you're thinking the right way, but there are some logistical details to think about and understanding the limits of this body.
But there is a process right now that we can't follow, and if we find that there are problem properties, then we can address them individually.
So I would just say there are some differences in how you convey property. I'm having to really telescope this down as best I can, but this is a really important decision. If you do decide to acquire property, who should own it? Right now, the Days Inn parcel is owned by the city.
Correct.
It's not owned by you, and there's no reason it has to be owned by you. But when you go to sell property that you own, you're allowed to say, this is up for auction, basically, competitive bidding, and here are the requirements. If you're gonna bid for this property, then you have to follow all of our requirements to keep it like to keep it just like the redevelopment area plan that we've got. The city has different set of powers. They don't have to put it up for competitive bidding. They can actually choose a developer. They can say, as long as that developer gets into an agreement with us where they promise to make low-income housing and they promise to do it a certain way, we could choose the person who buys our property. You don't get that option. Only the city does. So there'll be times where you say, you know what, we really need the city to buy this property because we think we're going to have to go out to developers. It's a big project. We're going to have to get those developers interested. Might be 4 or 5, and we're going to have to choose one of them. And we don't want it just to be by competitive bidding. So there might be a reason why you want the city to buy the property. There might be occasions where you want to buy the property because you have this ability to essentially, it could be an essential discount to the price of the property. If you say, we're putting all these requirements on this, you got to build, it's got to stay single family, it's got to be consistent with the plan, you got to put in the curb and gutter, and you could put all those requirements and you could say, all right, now put it out for auction, let everybody competitively bid, and the highest bid you get for that piece of property is $15,000, even though it's worth more, let's say. You're allowed to sell it for $15,000 because you put all those requirements on it. And there was an open competitive bidding process. And so now a developer can go, man, I think I could, I can only get $300 in rent. That means I can only afford this much to build, and the land can't cost more than $15,000. If the land costs more than $15,000, I can't do this project. And so developers will come in and they'll bid $12,000, $13,000, $14,000, $15,000, they'll stop. And you can sell it to the person who bought it for $15,000, even though that land might actually be valued something higher. Usually the city has to sell at the actual value of land.
But the city cannot be in the landlord business.
Well, they can.
They can.
City has all the powers you have.
So the city can own it, not sell it, and they can put their own.
Yeah, they can lease it. They could have a property manager take care of it. They are absolutely entitled to do all that. But of course, that's staff. It's expensive to do that. It's difficult to do that. It means they have to hire new folks to take care of it.
I'll tell you, as an alderman, I don't want to be in the development business. I don't want to be in the, that's not what, I'm there to create policy, not to be a developer. And that's been some issue for a time in the city of Newburgh, that we have these properties and we don't want it, we want private sector to come in because it puts it in the tax base. If we own it, there's no tax.
There's no tax.
Yeah, we want the tax base to continue to provide amenities and do other things in the city, so that's why we want that.
Yep. And that is the choice that most local governments in North Carolina make. There are those specific examples where they might not, like for teacher housing or something like that. But most local governments say, get it in the private sector's hands because they're better at managing property on a day-to-day basis. Final thing I want to talk about is how you think like a developer.
Got one more question
Yes.
on as far as when we convey the property and the covenants and restrictions. I spoke briefly about this yesterday. I see it in Omar. But as far as restrictions, can you put restrictions on construction standards, i.e., I want this to be a LEED gold building? Because resiliency is obviously what we're going to be really banging on now, and that could be something that we've got to be resilient to the whatever 25-year storm or something.
Yes, but if we get into the how do you think like a private developer, the way I approach that is I go, okay, you've now made me build a LEED house.
No, yeah.
It's more expensive.
Now you have to pay me to take them.
I can't pay more than this
Correct.
much for the land. Maybe that is the fair market about. Once you put those restrictions on, if everyone has to buy that land subject to those restrictions, then maybe that value of that land
Do
is
we have to take the highest bid?
Yes, you do.
Have to take the highest
Yes,
bid.
yes, you do. You have to take the highest bidder. So you got to design those restrictions the way you want. This group has to. The city does not. The city owns it. The city can say, we're selling it to whoever meets our requirements. However, the city has to sell it for fair market value. This group gets to sell it at whatever the highest bid is. We can talk about those details.
Sure,
if we get
I'm
there.
way off.
So I was going to have an example, but I don't think we have time, folks. We probably need to wrap up in the next few minutes.
Is it your car?
Because my car.
We give you all the time. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I've got a little more time, but I need to be. Yeah. How much time? I've been given different signals, so some folks are like, you got like 20 more minutes, and then so we kept going.
No, but the discussion is fruitful. I'm learning a lot, and we need to know this before moving forward.
All right, so then I'm going to do this because I want to make sure. By the way, the Redevelopment Commission, you get funds from the city, so the municipality can appropriate funds to you. They can convey property to you for you to hold. Doesn't
At
mean
no
they will,
cost?
but they can
At no cost?
at no cost. It's the one exception. They have to sell all their property fair market value, but with you, they can give it to you at no cost. You have to either use competitive bidding, or if you sell to a nonprofit, if you sell to a nonprofit, you must actually have them pay fair market value for it. There's no giving it away. It's in here if you want to see those statutes. Okay. So now, you're a private developer because, by the way, you are private developers. What do you think is the first thing as a private, and we're tired, and I get that, you haven't had lunch, people just had muffins and donuts. But what is your first step? If you're a private developer thinking, hey, I want to do something with, this is a historic theater, by the way, you can't tell because it's ugly. It's not been used as a historic theater. And so as a private, I was going to use this for a land bank example for you all, but I'm not. So he sees this, if you know who he is, real estate developer there, Bob Sherman. He sees this and he says, I think I can do something with this. What's the first thing he needs to think about?
Profit.
Profit. What?
He said profit.
So he's got to have. So how does he figure out profit?
So it costs them to sell.
Cost him to sell. So just like that. So he's going to buy it. He's going to sell it.
No, he's gonna buy it, he's gonna rent it.
Yeah. You guys are going. You're too far down. You're too far down the road.
Yeah.
He's not thinking that just yet. Right now,
Acquisition costs.
he'll think about acquisition costs.
What's it gonna be? What can you use it for?
That's it.
And then
First, you've got to have an idea.
Making a park
You
there.
got to have an idea. And you all are creating the idea. You are doing the step of a private developer. You were making an idea. Yes.
Who's the guy?
Oh, that is.
Oh, God.
In a ridiculous movie.
Have you ever seen
Caddyshack.
Caddyshack?
I was born after the 80s.
Okay, yeah.
That's beyond her time.
Back to school, there you go. Don't watch Back to School.
So now he has an idea. He wants to take this piece of property, and he says, I think actually I could turn that into a real theater. I think I can. I'm not sure if it's profitable yet. How come he doesn't know whether it's profitable yet? Well, first, somebody else owns that piece of property. So you shouldn't put any money into figuring out whether there's any kind of profit to be made or what's going to happen until you actually know that you can own it. So the second piece is called site control. So one of the dangers of this redevelopment commission is that you all are making plans for property that you don't necessarily own. And you need to understand that you are already, if you do that, you are violating principle step number 2 in the private redevelopment process. So I have to have an idea, and you're doing that. You're thinking about how it's going to be in the future. But then you have to get site control. That doesn't have to be that you buy it outright. It could mean you just get an option contract where you tell the owner, hey, promise to sell me this for $50,000. Give me 6 months to figure out if it's profitable. I don't know yet, but give me 6 months, and I'll come back to you, and I'll buy it for $50,000, and I pay some small fee to keep the property up to market. That's called site control. At that point, once the developer starts investing and starts paying for this property, that's money out the door, right? So now we have to start thinking, what does it take? What does it take, you think? What do you have to figure out whether it's profitable? What kind of research do you need?
See what it's zoned for?
Okay, so you have to see what it's zoned for to make sure it's even possible. So that's one form of research.
What the market will bear.
So if it's a historic theater, I'm looking at, okay, what does it cost to run a theater? Or maybe I'll just make it a dance hall, or maybe I turn it into a retail space. I just have clothes that I sell there. What's the retail space get? Is it $10 a square foot here in this area? And so you're going through and you're figuring out whether or not it's profitable. And then after you've done that, first, is that costless? To figure out what the market's going to bear, to figure out whether it's going to be a closed store, feasibility study, the bank's going to require you, absolutely. There's analysis required, and that is money too. So you're putting all this money out the door, you've reserved this, you've done some financial analysis, you've done some feasibility analysis for your concept, you've done some market analysis. And you might even have to figure out who's going to own this thing. And I don't have enough money. I need an ownership entity. I have to bring in some investors to make this happen. I have to convince them that it's profitable. And so after I've done that, after I get my investors, then I can spend money on an architect maybe to do some kind of development program that I can then show to the city and say, can I change it? Is this okay? So then I get approval. And so I've spent all this money. And when do I find out whether or not I actually am going to be able to make this project work? Way down, I can't make it. Way down here. Way down here. So I've already spent all this money all along. So here's where, how would you be able to help that private developer? How can this commission help the private developer?
Already have a plan.
Already have a plan.
So you've done the market analysis, you've figured out what's out there. Now, a good example we can think of right now is the Days Inside. How many people have called us, come to us, you should do this, you should do that, it should be this, low-income housing, this, and this. And then you say, well, what's the plan? What's it going to do? What's the impact of the neighborhood? What would it cost? Just, and then, well, I don't know. So that's it's great that people have ideas, but this is definitely a process. But by having what you do, the steps make it a little bit easier. I mean, this is what you do all day long, Kip, and looking at housing developments, where you're going to put them.
Yeah. So you all have analysis in this CNI report. You can do additional analysis, and you're holding the property that's going to be redeveloped in many cases. And so you're basically taking that risk. You've got site control. You're developing the plan. You're helping developers see, hey, this is what the market can bear. Look, we've done some market analysis to show that we need 20 new units in this area over the next 5 years, or we need 100 new units in this area over the next 5 years. And the market will support it, and it'll get you $400 of rent a month. That's the kind of analysis you can do, so that when the developer comes in, they can go, all right, now that I've looked at the Redevelopment Commission's analysis, I know that if I buy that property for $15,000, I can make a reasonable profit. And so now you have the private sector coming in, and they know you're putting in streetscape improvements, and they know you're putting a community center at the corner, and they know that you're doing something else. So, and it's all in that plan. So you all are either going to be the private developers yourselves, or you're going to buy the property, you're going to develop it, you're going to make it a community center, or you are going to set the stage to make it so that the private sector goes, oh yeah, this can work, and I can
Can I
invest.
give them one other example? There was one other redevelopment commission in the history of the city of Newburgh, and that was in the 60s, and it was the Redevelopment Commission for the waterfront downtown and the downtown area. So that redevelopment commission acquired that property that was there that used to be fish houses and other things through the late 60s and early 70s down there. And the idea was they spent public funds to bulkhead it, to fill it in, to make Craven Street go down. And then they got a UDAG grant, which was, urban
It's the
development.
CDBG precedent.
Yeah, so it was a UDAG grant. Dad was involved in that to lure, at the time, the Sheraton Hotel to build, and they gave them the whole property, which they probably shouldn't, but anyway, the Redevelopment Commission, that was the plan, to spur development in downtown by having a hotel. That was part of the plan. Then the shops started to rehabilitate, do things to support a tourism, thought process in creating downtown. So that's how that Redevelopment Commission impacted. There was a plan. They did the groundwork in preparing that land, selling it to a for-profit entity that built a hotel with a restaurant. And because people were staying in the hotels, then shopkeepers said, well, I can put a shop and sell dresses to the people coming there. And a restaurant said, well, people will need a meal other than what the restaurant provides, so I'm going to open up a restaurant or whatever. So that's kind of how that Redevelopment Commission, and that was our thought process. The mayor and I talked about that commission and how do we take this commission and do the same thing in this area. So they considered that a blighted area back. I don't know, Kip, when did you get here in the 70s? No. Late 70s was already, was in the process.
I remember back behind the
Nelson
Sheraton
Seafood,
back
all
there,
of that.
all those places, yeah.
And that was
I'm
part
not
of
that
the
old.
development. Yeah. Just as a good example
You
to
were
say.
two.
that-
Play.
Yeah,
I
as a
ain't
good
that old.
example to show them what the redevelopment commission, and that's how that was used to develop and spur development in the downtown area.
And so what you all may do is you may take a look at property that's now blighted residential structures, and you could say, you know what, we're gonna buy that. You do the same thing. Say, you know what, it needs new curb and gutter. We're gonna demolish these houses. We're gonna widen the street. We're gonna make sure that there's curb and gutter now. We're gonna grade the lots so that instead of being hilly, they're gonna be flat. And so a developer otherwise would have been thinking, oh man, I gotta spend money to do that. I gotta spend money to do that. And so then you say, okay, we've set the table. Now, private investor, you can come on in and you can buy the property for us at competitive bidding, you know, and however much you can afford, and then you can build whatever it is that makes sense here, subject to our plan. That's how it works. Yeah.
Does the commission have the ability to make certain recommendations to the zoning committee?
You got.
That's an element of the redevelopment plan, is for
So
you
we
to.
can rezone.
Well, you don't have the power to
You
rezone.
can
Recommend.
You can make recommendations.
propose zoning
Propose, yeah.
in your
You got it, yeah.
redevelopment plan, which then
You
is
got it
approved
in
by
it,
the board
so-
of aldermen.
Right. Did you,
I know a guy that can get stuff on the agenda.
No, but this is really important for those of you who haven't been on boards. You are communicating through all of your actions with the governing board and with the planning commission, frankly. This is all a big, transparent, public communications process. We're saying, we think the following zoning is needed, and you put it in your plan. And then the planning commission says, when they have 45 days, they say, yeah, we agree, or they say, that's nuts, we recommend against this. And then it goes to the governing board, and the governing board says, we agree with half of the zoning things you've recommended. And so once they've adopted that plan, they've basically said they're going to change the zoning. So you are in a communication process. You might not get everything you want, but this is a public way for you to speak to the board and to the planning commission about the future of this area. All right. You all are doing, are you going to talk about what site control you need? I'm sure it sounds like you're already talking about it. Who's gonna buy the property? I was going to put this up. We could have a discussion. This is what your plan says. It's got a proposed community center right there. You see it in the middle? We've got affordable home ownership over here. We've got a community garden there. We've got a community center there. We've got fountain reconstruction there. Got to have financing for that.
Well, one of the things that was on the CNI was part of what Craven Terrace, but that's already taken place in that it's gone under private ownership now. So isn't that correct, Teresa? That was part of the original plan, but that step's been taking place?
Yes.
Yes, so the Craven Terrace part's already taken place. But it's actually just the tax credit project. Yeah.
Everything north of the blue
Preservation
line
management.
is Broad Street.
Let me check this map out. That's what Jeff was talking about. That is a parcel by parcel analysis of every single.
And everything that Craven Terrace right now is Duncanfield. Yeah.
You've got the value per acre here. Red ones are county tax foreclosures. Vacant lots are the light.
42% of the study area.
42%.
Yes. And it's more than that now.
So these are your tools.
All right.
I don't think we have time for meeting for transparency and ethics requirements. You're going to be subject to public records.
Ethics.
You're going to be subject to open meetings rules. And we talked about ethics.
I think we talked about